Seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
What?
If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor.
What difference at this point does it make?
Doesn't make sense.
If you're looking to make sense out of what's going on in the world today, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, Annie, the Radio Chick-A-Dee, and featuring Curtis C.S. Bennett and the most interesting guests that you'll find anywhere on Internet radio. And you can join the show and let your voice be heard by dialing 917-889-3675. So sit back, relax, and remember, Southern Sense is common sense.
Friends, the entire world is experiencing food shortages. Supply chain breakdowns continue to have a domino effect on everything, especially food production. Farmers can't plant as many crops now because of fertilizer shortages, forced regulations, and of course, high fuel prices. This will cause more painful food shortages when we run out of the food we're eating now. You know, food takes time to grow. So when farmers don't plant, well, months later, we don't eat. That's why you need to prepare for an increasing number of food shortages. And the best way is to invest in Ready Hour emergency food from My Patriot Supply. It's a perfect hedge against skyrocketing prices and shortages. Right now, save $50 on a 4-week food kit from My Patriot Supply. Go to preparewithsouthernsense.com and get your $50 savings on a 4-week emergency food kits that average over 2,000 calories per day. That's preparewithsouthernsense.com. Getting prepared now. Well, easily click on My Patriot Supply and go directly to the website and get your $50 savings. As I'm telling you now, those who know what's coming are getting prepared right now. And shouldn't you? Prepare with southern-sense.com. That's southern-sense.com. Click on My Patriot Supply. Do it now. All right, and welcome back to another adventure here on Southern Sense. You're listening live on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, Global Enlightenment Radio, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, iHeart, and half a dozen other places. So just go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. I'm your hostess with the least mostest, the Radio Chick-A-Dee, Annie. And once again, guest co-hosting for Curtis C.S. Bennett, who is still in the process of going to closing and moving and whatever else on his new house, former Congressman from the great state of Florida, Ted Yoho. Good afternoon, Ted. Welcome back again.
Hey, Annie, thanks for having me on. Look forward to a great power-packed show that you've got lined up today, and there's definitely not a shortage to talk about.
Oh no, and it's hitting the fan left and right the last couple of days with the voting irregularities, the vote counts being redone, and as far as I understand, as of this morning, Arizona is in an audit. Ah, geez, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy, and there's ballot dumps being done. I don't know where to start, Ted. It is absolutely insane out there. But we got ourselves a great lineup. We got Dan Shyti. He wrote a great book called American Gaslighting, How America is Being Systematically Taught to Hate Itself. We've been talking about that, Ted, over the last several shows with you and our guests. And
We sure have.
Unfortunately, his agent booked him with me only 2 days ago, so I haven't had a chance to go through the entire book. I had to do a quick speed reading. But from what I saw, it is everything that we have been discussing, from critical race theory to the rewriting of history to the destruction of statues and the branding of even just words and phrases just to distort everything and make us hate ourselves. It's crazy, and we've got a chance to turn this around. You know, people like you and I getting our voices out, we have a chance to turn this around. That's going to be followed by Tim Furey. He's with the London Center for Policy Research. He's on the Project Sentinel there. We're going to be talking to him about the crazy economy and the elections and everything else going on. And then we have two guests at the same time. My friend Mark Tapscott from the Epoch Times, or as he says, the Epoch Times. You may remember him, Ted, because he also started Hill Faith when he was down there in D.C., and which I think he still runs. Also, Pete Sepp.
I think he does.
Yeah. Pete Sepp with the National Taxpayer Union. So we're going to be talking about a heck of a lot going on. But most important, since I live in the heart of the Tri-Command with the Marine Corps Air Station just a couple of miles north of me, and Paris Island Marine Corps Recruit Depot just to the south and east of me, and the Naval Hospital right smack in the middle. Yesterday was the Marine Corps birthday, so Semper Fi Marines, and happy birthday to you. That brings me. Now that brings me into today, which is Veterans Day, and I'm kind of upset with my local government here, my county government, because we do have the tropical storm Nicole hitting us at this point in time. So they postponed the Veterans Day parade, and rightly. No, I used the wrong word, Ted. They canceled the parade. They did not postpone it. They canceled it with no new date. And we are here in one of the largest military areas. As I said, the two bases right here in town, in the county, and a large contingent of retired military here. And they don't reschedule it for after the storm comes through. That's shameful. Even if they did it a week later.
That is. I mean, yeah, you would think they would do that for sure. I mean, as important as 11:11 at the 11th hour is in our history, hopefully they will. Hopefully they'll listen to your show and say, we're going to reschedule that.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I'm going to get a hold of my county councilman later on today. I have him on texting him, speed dial. Plus, he's leaving office at the end of this year, and the new guy is coming in, and the new guy is someone that we all supported. So I have them both. Hey, do something, you know, slap the county chair upside his head, and get them to reschedule. I mean, that's serious. You know, with the amount of military we have here, and to not reschedule it, just say simply that we've canceled it. That's a slap in the face to the majority of residents here, honestly. Anyway, what I was trying to get to is that today's show, the dedication is now today, because it is Veterans Day, in honor of all veterans who honorably served our nation. And I've taken a couple of things off the internet, and this is from the defense.gov. And it's some facts about Veterans Day that most people aren't aware of. And that I combined with some other stuff I found on the internet to put together today's dedication. So let me pull up the video for that. And here we go. Today's dedication, again, is in honor of all veterans who honorably served our nation, be it in times of war or peace. And from defense.gov, this is facts that few know about Veterans Day. Veterans Day is a well-known American holiday, but there are also a few misconceptions about it, like how it's spelled or whom exactly it celebrates. To clear some of that up, here are important facts you should know. Veterans Day does not have an apostrophe. A lot of people think it's Veterans Day, Veteran apostrophe S, Veterans Day, or spelt Veterans with the apostrophe after. But they're wrong. The holiday is not a day that belongs to one veteran or multiple veterans, which is what an apostrophe implies. It's a day for honoring all veterans, so no apostrophe is needed. A lot of Americans get this confused, and we'll be honest, it can be a little annoying to all the living veterans out there. Memorial Day is a time to remember those who gave their lives for our country, particularly in battle or from wounds they suffered in battle. Veterans Day honors all of those who have served this country in war or peace, dead or alive, although it's largely intended to thank living veterans for their sacrifices. It was originally called Armistice Day, commemorating the end of World War I. World War I officially ended when the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919. However, the fighting ended about 7 months before that, when the Allies and Germany put into effect an armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. For that reason, November 11, 1918 was largely considered the end of the war to end all wars and dubbed Armistice Day. In 1926, Congress officially recognized it as the end of the war, and in 1938, it became an official holiday, primarily a day set aside to honor the veterans of World War I. But then World War II and the Korean War happened. So on June 1, 1954, at the urging of veteran service organizations, Congress amended the commemoration yet again by changing the word armistice to veterans, so the day would honor American veterans of all wars. For a while, Veterans Day was changed too, and it confused everybody. Congress signed the Uniform Holiday Bill in 1968 to ensure that a few federal holidays, Veterans Day included, would be celebrated on a Monday. Officials hoped it would spur travel and other family activities over a long weekend, which would stimulate the economy. For some inexplicable reason, the bill set Veterans Day commemorations for the fourth Monday of every October. On October 25, 1971, the first Veterans Day under this new bill was held. We're not sure why it took 3 years to implement, but not surprisingly, there was a lot of confusion about the change, and many states were unhappy, choosing to continue to recognize the day as they previously had in November. Within a few years, it became pretty apparent that most U.S. citizens wanted to celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th, since it was a matter of historic and patriotic significance. So on September 20th, 1975, President Gerald Ford signed another law, Public Law 94-97, which returned the annual observation to its original date, starting in 1978. And did you know other countries celebrate it too, in their own ways? World War I was a multinational effort, so it makes sense that our allies also wanted to celebrate their veterans on November 11th. The name of the day and the type of commemorations differ, however. Canada and Australia call it November 11th Remembrance Day. Canada's observation is pretty similar to our own, except many of its citizens wear red poppy flowers to honor their war dead. In Australia, the day is more akin to our Memorial Day. Great Great Britain calls it Remembrance Day too, but it observes it on the Sunday closest to November 11th with parades, services, and 2 minutes of silence in London to honor those who lost their lives in war. One thing aside that I will add, that also our veterans remembered with red poppies. It is for a field that is still maintained in Europe, in Flanders, and the red poppies signify that remembrance. Veterans Day is distinct from Memorial Day, a U.S. public holiday in May. Veterans Day celebrates the service of all U.S. military veterans, while Memorial Day honors those who have died while in military service. Another military holiday that also occurs in May, Armed Forces Day, honors those currently serving in the U.S. military. Additionally, Women Veterans Day is recognized by a growing number of U.S. states that specifically honor women who have served in the U.S. military. On November 11, 1919, President Woodrow Wilson issued a message to his countrymen on the first Armistice Day, in which he expressed what he felt the day meant to Americans. And he said, "A year ago today, our enemies laid down their arms in accordance with an armistice, which rendered them impotent to renewed hostilities, and gave to the world an assured opportunity to reconstruct its shattered order and to work out in peace a new and more just set of international relations. The soldiers and people of the European allies had fought and endured for more than 4 years to uphold the barrier of civilization against the aggressions of armed force. We ourselves have been in the conflict something more than a year and a half. With splendid forgetfulness of mere personal concerns, we remodeled our industries, concentrated our financial resources, increased our agricultural output, and assembled a great army, so that at the last, our power was a decisive factor in the victory. We were able to bring the vast resources, material and moral, of a great and free people to the assistance of our associates in Europe, who had suffered and sacrificed without limit in the cause for which we fought. Out of this victory, there arose new possibilities of political freedom and economic concert. The war showed us the strength of great nations acting together for high purposes, and the victory of arms foretells the enduring conquest which can be made in peace when nations act justly and in furtherance of the common interest of men. To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service, and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it has freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of the nation. In 1945, World War II veteran Raymond Weeks from Birmingham, Alabama, had the idea to expand Armistice Day to celebrate all veterans, not just those who died in World War I. Weeks led a delegation to General Dwight Eisenhower, who supported the idea of a National Veterans Day. Weeks led the first national celebration in 1947 in Alabama, and annually until his death in 1985. President Reagan honored Weeks at the White House with the Presidential Citizenship Medal in 1982 as the driving force for the national holiday. Elizabeth Dole, who prepared the briefing for President Reagan, determined Weeks as the father of Veterans Day. Today's show is dedicated to all the veterans from all of the wars we have fought on our shores and beyond. It is dedicated to those that live and those that have passed. And we dedicate it also to the brave men and women that serve in our military from the birth of this nation through today and into our hopeful future. We additionally dedicate the show to the brave men and women that serve as first responders, be they law enforcement, firefighters, or emergency services. We can never say thank you enough. May God bless each and every one. And we dedicate it with this song from my friend, Todd Allen Harridan.
Born in the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. My strength was not taken from others. Others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stay proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. Is my
All right, and we're back. You're here live, listening to Southern Sons once again. And you can always find out where we are by just going to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Of course, I'm here with my guest co-host, a former congressman from the great state of Florida, and what an election down there, Ted Yoho. Ted, wow, you guys rocked here in South Carolina. It was a red tidal wave. And the same with in Florida. I'm hearing that areas that were traditionally blue, are now red, including, did I hear correctly? But now you have a Republican mayor in Miami?
Yeah. Things are good in Florida. We know how to do it down here. And, it's a team effort from the governor down through the legislative body that makes up our Congress here in the state legislature. Very strong conservative. And the good thing is the Republican numbers have gone up. I think it's like 320,000 registered Republican increase from the last election cycle. And a lot of that is due, I got to give it credit to Ron DeSantis for the policies he's put in place. No wokeism, going after Disney, not closing down the economy. And of course, we don't have a state income tax, so it's one of the cheaper states to live in. And all these people were moving down here, and our fear was going to be big influx of the liberals leaving the states they created and come down here and do the same thing here. But it looks like it was the good people that came down, or the intelligent ones.
Well, I'd have to say it's probably more good people than the others. And unfortunately, I think pretty soon Florida may inherit one of my brothers, and they're not conservative like I am. So.
Well, he may not like it. I mean, there's MAGA hats, there's Trump signs, there's the Santa signs everywhere. And, it's funny because I saw very, very few Biden, Charlie Crist, and Val Deming signs. I mean, you just don't see them. People, I think they're embarrassed, as they should be, to have those people out. But there are a few. What you can't fix, you can fix ignorance because you can educate, but you can't fix stupid.
Yeah. Well, now, do you still have Debbie, what's her name, Schultz?
Yeah, somebody else asked me that the other day, where's Debbie? And she's still here, but she's become very, very low keyed. And you always worry about stuff like that when people are low keyed, but no, she's there, and she is a true blue liberal, progressive, Democrat, or Marxist, communist / communist.
Yeah, that's
they're not. They're not Democrats compared to what a Democrat was.
They're Democrats. I'm going to get banned off of Twitter or something real soon. I just got myself back up on YouTube.
Yeah.
And
there you go.
I had a ton of followers, and I can't get that one channel back up. They refused to release it. So I had to start all over again from scratch. So if you guys are out there listening in the sound of my voice, go back onto YouTube, find the new channel. There's a link to it on my show page, and get my fan numbers back up. But we're trying.
Yeah, I mean, you need that. I mean, if they don't do that, they're sequestering again the conservative talk radios to educate people. And the people that are out there listening, spread the word around. I mean, this is a time we're fighting for the survival of this country. We're a lot of people call us an empire, but I think we're a constitutional republic that has done very well and brought more freedom and wealth to the world than ever has been said. And it came from the founding of this country.
Yeah. Now, I noticed there's some phone calls up in the studio. Just to let the people that are listening that my co-host Curtis Bennett, who normally controls the studio, is not here. So since Ted is calling in, I'm not sure who I've got dialed in. So if you are my next guest, please press 1 and I will bring you on. Otherwise, I'm assuming that you're just going to be listening in onto the show, and I thank you. Because we are, like I said, up on Facebook and YouTube and half a dozen other places. Where do I have myself now? Even up on LinkedIn. Twitter has a feed going up. It's up on my homepage, so you can listen or watch the show on any of these other locations out there. So we're getting our voice out there, Ted. But did you know what Facebook did several days prior to the election? They refused to allow any political or social issue ads. 0. And they only released it, I believe it was yesterday. I got an email saying, we're now allowing ads back on political and social issues. talk about
They
silencing.
just can't get it right, can they?
But
Yeah.
now I'm wondering if they only sent that out to those of us that lean right, conservative, Christian conservative, or did they send that to everyone? I know I got it on.
That's an interesting thing to do some forensic on that to see.
Now, I have a couple of different Facebook accounts. Now, there's the personal one. I didn't get any email message on the personal accounts, only on Southern Sense. So it makes me wonder whether or
Is that
not
right?
they filtered who received the message saying no ads. Be very interesting to
Boy, it
find
sure
out.
would make you think that, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
That would be, yeah.
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 So,
But I appreciate you doing that tribute for the Veterans Day too. You know, it's always something that's, you know, when I was in Congress, it was always a honor to be able to go and participate in the Veterans celebration. And it's, you know, the 11th day, the 11th month, the 11th hour. And it's something when I was traveling overseas, you know, as you said, different countries have their version of that, and the same with Memorial Day. And I remember we were in a country and they had Veterans Day celebrations, and their economy shut down, and it was like a day off for families to spend together to celebrate and remember these things. And, you know, I wish we would do that here and just close down on a few things like Veterans Day, Memorial Day, voting day, you know, for national elections. Make it a holiday and everybody votes the same day.
well, you know what I'd like to see for the day we vote? You do it on April 16th. Why April 16th? Because you pay your taxes on April 15th. So as your hand is shaking, as you're writing that check, or you're sitting there in front of your tax accountant shivering, going, oh my God, what am I going to get hit with? And then you vote the very next day. I think it's going to change the way a lot of people vote, don't you?
Well, I think so. I remember when I ran, I was with a horse client of mine, and she told me she couldn't support me. And I said, we were talking about taxes. And I said, the government, you know, they take our taxes and all this. She goes, well, I personally don't think we pay enough in taxes. And I said, really? I said, I think we pay plenty in taxes, and I don't mind paying my taxes. What I have a problem is how my government spends my taxes without fixing problems.
Well,
And she agreed with me on that.
yeah, because we're later on in the show, we're going to have Pete Sepp from the National Taxpayer Union, and we're going to be talking about that.
That's good.
And they have some really good ideas on helping to re-stimulate this economy. And Joe Biden did that post-election speech, and I believe a reporter, someone was asking him, what about drilling? And he says, no more drilling, absolutely no more drilling, period. I'm going, yeah, really? You want to shut down our economy? You say absolutely, as of tomorrow, no more drilling. Now, how are you going to manufacture anything? How are you going to create anything? Because we need petrochemicals for every single thing we do. There's not a single thing that we come in contact with in our daily lives outside of the fresh air when you step outside of your home that does not involve some form of petrochemicals. So what are you going to do?
I agree with you. Well, coming from Biden, number one, it's an ill-informed, it's an ignorant, and a very damaging thing to say. I was talking to one of my clients yesterday who's in the energy business, and he talks at universities and that. And he said enrollment for geological students that go into the petroleum industry is off by over 30%. And it's just something that's happened with this administration because they don't see a future in those kind of jobs. And it's a shame because what Biden and that whole green movement is pushing is it's a farce. This country, the world is not going to get off petrochemicals for at least 50 years. Look at everything that has a motor on it. Everything that flies, a bus, you know, jets, buses don't fly, but airplanes and all that stuff, locomotives, ships, all that stuff is running on a form of petrochemicals. Some of them are transitioning to LNG, some are transitioning to batteries or hydrogen. And in Florida, we just had the hurricane. We had mandatory evacuations in some areas, and it showed on the news cars were bumper to bumper in 3 and 4 lanes of traffic. And I was telling my wife, we were talking, I says, can you imagine if that car a couple ahead of us was an EV, electrical vehicle, and it was only about a quarter charged, and we're stuck here in traffic and that thing just dies? You know, it's a disaster, and we're not ready for that. Can we move that direction? Yeah, but it should be a common sense type of movement, not a mandate from the government when there's no infrastructure and the batteries and all that other stuff and the pollution that comes with producing all that stuff that they fail to talk about. And so this guy, he's just off. Well, he's off his rocker or off his meds. I don't know which.
Something. Absolutely.
I'll probably go to hell for saying that.
No,
and other things I've said.
I was watching Biden when he was doing his post-election speech with my honey, and I'm looking at his eyes, and I said, they've pumped him up with something, because his eyes were actually focused. If you see when he starts to go off the rails, that's when his eyes are kind of like unfocused. He's fidgeting around trying to find where he is or why he is. But this time he was completely focused. His eyes looked clear. And I said, they gave him something. They had to. Otherwise, you compare what he did prior, the week before, to how he looked on election night. And I'd like some of that little joy juice. Get me pumped up.
Maybe stumbled into Hunter's medicine cabinet.
Oh, now they really are going to come.
I'm sorry, that was bad. That was bad too. Must be Friday.
Oh man, I'm just texted the publicist for our next guest is saying, listen, we're waiting for him to call in. So I'm hoping that we get our next guest in, because he has a really interesting book, and he talks about, all these different things that we are facing. And in this election cycle, you saw a lot of this being played out of what he talks about. The changing of our national history. Now suddenly our forefathers were all evil people. No, they had an idea. They weren't uneducated. They knew the Greek and Roman philosophers. They knew history. They knew the Bible. They molded all of that to create the most unique experiment this world has ever seen. And you know this, Ted. They knew that at the time, in order to create the nation, they had to put mechanisms in place to eventually deal with the issue of slavery. But first they had to form the nation. And if that nation was never formed, then slavery would have gone on indefinitely under the rule.
No, it would have. There's no doubt about that. Hillsdale College does a great 101 constitutional class, and they give you a book. And it was very insightful. I got into that when I first decided to run for Congress back in 2010. And there was a phrase that was used. It's called the exclusion clause, that says we cannot talk about that subject that we can't bring up right now. And it was slavery. And this was talked about in going into 1789 when they ratified the U.S. Constitution. And so for 20 years, they fought hard to stay away from the legislation on slavery, but yet the abolitionist movement was going on. And so you started to see that come of light after 1809, because they knew it was bad, but they knew that they could not get the southern states to join the Union and form a strong country if the slavery issue came up. And again, it goes back to the wisdom and the astuteness of these people when the founders put this document together. And it is absolutely amazing how this has survived the test of time. But we've got a political party that's attacking this and wants to erode this. And going back to the guest, Daniel Shyti, on his book, American Gaslighting, I've got that pulled up now if you want to talk about that and just kind of give it a prelude to your listeners if he hasn't checked in yet.
Yeah, I'm still waiting. Like I said, I sent a text to his publicist and wondering, because got the same exact email he sent to his client. And, well,
let's promote his book.
yeah, that we can do. American Gaslighting, How America is Being Systematically Taught to Hate Itself. There is a link up on the show page. So if you click on American Gaslighting next to the author's name, you can go directly to Amazon and download the book, which is in Kindle or hardcover form or paperback. And he talks about the Supreme Court's impact on racial equality. Now, here, I was watching the news earlier today, and in Chicago, this artist had put up, I don't know if you saw this, some 20-some-odd flyers for her art display. And it said, white only with a noose. Now, and rightly so.
What's that race car driver's name? Bubba
Wallace?
What's his name? Bubba Walker? Or
Bubba Wallace.
Bubba Wallace. Don't let him see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the artist happens to be black.
White only.
But if the artist is black, and she goes, well, I did it to show that racism is still prevalent. Well, number one.
That's not racism. That's hate speech. That's hatred.
Yeah. That's was one thing. That is outright hate speech. And she's showing her racial bias against anyone else that's not of the same skin color or racial background as she is. And that is bigotry. But then to put that hate speech out there as a hoax, to make everyone else think that maybe the KKK put it up there or neo-Nazis put it up there. No. She did that to instigate hatred and distrust. And had anyone done
maybe
that
she's Maxine Waters' speechwriter.
Possibility there. That's a good possibility.
That's an angry woman there.
She sees nothing wrong with what she's done. And yet, had I done that, or you done that, or any other myriad other people that were not of the same racial background as her, you would be in handcuffs. You'd be hauled off and hogtied.
You'd be canceled for sure. And that's why Daniel's book is so good, because he talks about that. You're being deceived. The pervasive propaganda paints America as a systemically and irredeemable racist country. And again, I think I've shared that with you when I was on the House floor. The first time I ever heard America is a systemically racist country. I'm like, never heard that before. It was from Steny Hoyer, and that's when that whole movement started, and the critical race theory and all those things came together. So they get their marching orders somewhere, and it's books like Daniel Shity's that comes out and exposes that. And that whole left movement, progressive movement, they're being conditioned to burn it all down. And I've heard Ilhan Omar say that. I've heard my former colleague from New York say that, and Rashid Tlaib. And Iona Presley, all those people are saying the same thing, and the media feeds that. They don't call them out on that, just like you said on that artist that put a noose out there and says for whites only. I mean, that's pretty hateful. That's racist. It's hateful, and it's hate speech.
It is.
But you know what I liked about Morgan Freeman? They were trying to get him engaged in the race, racism and all that. And he goes, the best way to get over this is stop talking about it. Just go on with your lives. And, I think that's just wise counsel. They want to foment this stuff and create that anger and that hatred between people. And I think if we follow Morgan Freeman's advice and just say, you want to get over racism, stop talking about it. And it'll go away.
Yeah, it always floored me that, how you would create a problem where there really wasn't one. They're teaching critical race theory, they're teaching gender identity to kids as young as 4 or 5 years old. A child that young doesn't understand any of that. A kid is a kid is a kid is a kid.
They can't comprehend that at that age.
They don't understand sex. But yet we have a segment of society that is trying to divide us harder and harder and harder. And what's the best way? Well, you do what Hitler did. You get to the kids. That's why he created kindergarten. He figured if we have the children as young as 4 and 5 years old in kindergarten, and kindergarten is a German word for a garden for the children. Kinder is a German word for children. And if they have the government controlling what these kids are learning and how they are thinking, they control the next generation forever. And that is what they're doing to our kids today. And we've got to find ways to stop this. We need the mama and papa bears out there in school board meetings and say, enough is enough. A child as young as that does not understand racial hatred, does not understand the difference of genders, doesn't understand sex.
What?
Let a kid be a kid.
They can't figure out what cereal to eat in the morning.
No, but...
well, again, going back to this book, those are the things that the answer should concern every freedom-loving American. The book explains, it goes into the threats of our nation, the tools used to divide us, racism, CRT, Black Lives Matter, white privilege, all those things. And if you talk out against that, then you get canceled. You're not woke, and then they go after you for wokeism. And so those are the tools that they're using against us to divide this nation. And I fault Obama as the instigator of this. He was a community organizer who really brought this to the forefront. This is something the left has been trying to do and take control and reimagine America. And I think this is something that should scare everybody. If they were to collapse it or burn it down, what's going to replace it? Yeah. What's going to replace America? And again, when I traveled the world, everybody looked at America as that bastion of freedom. And it was also a check against aggression from other nations. And today it's China and Russia. If America goes away, and I've got a lot of people that are expats and other ones that want to be, and they want to move to a better country. I'm like, if America fails, you don't get it. If America fails, there will be no safe bastions because it's going to be autocratic and authoritarian rule wherever you go. And we've got enough of it here, and we need to fight back against that. And that's why books like your guest, if he does come on, is so important to go out there for people to read, to educate them, and then become engaged. And nobody wants to be engaged. We're all busy. But somebody told me once, success is built on inconvenience. If not, everybody would be successful. You know, we've all got better things to do, but you've got to put a priority on some things. And I can't think of a better thing than thinking of this country and what it's done for so many people. And why do we want to change that and lose that?
Well, you know, you said several things that we can now start to tie together. You mentioned China and Russia. You mentioned the critical race theory. But when you look at the origins of Antifa, Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, you can tie all of this back to Marxism. They are just repackaged with different acronyms or different letters. They're alphabet soup. You know, the DEI that they have out there now, diversity, equity, and whatever. Now we even have those ESG credit ratings. It all ties directly back to the roots of Marxism. And China wants to be a global ruler. They want to control the entire earth. It doesn't matter where, but the one place that China has to dig in really hard in order to start changing the rest of the world to their think would be here, the United States. So what have they done?
Sure, and they're doing it.
They have done it insidiously. They started off with the Confucius schools. They started off with investing into various businesses and real estate properties here in the United States. They have a port up in New England that they refuse to allow. They have barred the U.S. Navy from this U.S. Navy port. They have bought the Empire State Building. That was a huge scandal in New York, but also now it's okay. It's okay. Just don't fly the red flag. They're entrenched in Hollywood. They're entrenched in media. They're entrenched in corporate boardrooms. They are entrenched in our government. They have their
stock
fingers.
exchange, the retirement programs for our people.
Exactly.
And we're taking our retirement monies for our school board members and all these public retirement programs. That money is being invested in Chinese government stocks that run their military. So our investments are growing their military.
Exactly. And up until last year, China was barred from any stock exchange here in the United States. That changed. And that's a huge mistake, because now with the economy that we had prior to President Trump, many of our businesses were going overseas to either India or China because it was cheaper to manufacture. Well, as we've discussed on the show many times, the second you go into China insists that they must have a member of the Chinese Communist Party on your board with their hand in your pie. So your intellectual property, anything you have that has to do with that business is going to be the property of the Chinese Communist Party sooner or later. I mean, I don't know how Elon Musk was able to open up a manufacturing over there and keep the Chinese out. Whatever he pulled or whatever he did, he's lucky. But any other company that
Well,
is over
I
there
don't know. I think
go
he's
ahead.
over there. My experience when I had the big companies, the Fortune 500s come into our office, and there's an American Chamber of Commerce in all these countries where we have our major corporations, and they join the American Chamber of Commerce to make sure regulations are going to allow them to do business. Typically, and not so much in the financial institutions, but in the manufacturing, you've got to allow 51% of your business to be owned by the government of China, which is the Communist Party. You've got to let go of intellectual property. And so now, who's the largest battery maker in the world is China. Who's one of the largest EV makers in the world? It's China. And, I can give you example after example, whether it was Ford, whether it was GE, it doesn't matter what company. China copied their product, went into direct competition. It was an inferior product. They were selling it cheaper, and they ran the originator of the product out of the country. And it just happens over and over again. And like you talked about, the Confucius Institutes, there's the 1,000 talent program where they go around and recruit our professors around the nation, our researchers and things like that. And this is happening every day in America. And politicians, some of them are unaware of it. We took a very strong stance of this, and we shut down programs. And you go back to Donald Trump, when Huawei and ZTE, which are their communications company from China, our Senate Intelligence Committee, the Senate committees, they did investigations and said in 2012 that they are a national security risk. But it took Donald Trump in 2018 and 2019 to run them out of our country and put enough pressure on our allies that if they wanted to share top secret information with us, they could not be involved in those networks could not be involved in their countries in communications. And this administration has ignored that, and they're on the move again. And so we have got to have strong leadership, and it has to be an American first type of policy. And I would think any country would have their country first policy, but the only way you can do that is to treat other countries equitably. A deal should be good for both partners.
Exactly. But we think like Westerners. We don't think like the Chinese do. We plan for the next week or the next year, maybe. They plan for the next 200 years. They're so far ahead in their planning, and they're starting to succeed. Their influence they have in our entertainment industry alone, that is the biggest role of propaganda that the Chinese have. Their involvement in social networks, the creation of TikTok. And every time someone says, well, they're up on TikTok, I shake my head. It's why are you allowing?
I do too.
your most, I mean, you think that they're not monitoring TikTok to see what people are posting, what they're vulnerable to, and how people will react to certain postings? They're looking, they're learning. And by using TikTok, they can create the biggest propaganda machine the world has ever seen. They already have been working on that.
No, it hasn't. No, and again, TikTok is not a private company. It is controlled by the Communist Party of China. Trump went after it, was going to shut it down. Of course, Biden comes in, and it's out there. And look, and the party of China, the Communist Party, they use that to create dissension in America. Look at one of the big things they have on there. It's the quiet quitting movement that's going on.
Oh, yeah.
They're promoting that in our nation. And they're laughing about it because the stupid Americans are they're on TikTok and they're sharing that. And every time you share that, they're in your computer. They know exactly what you are. They have captured all that information. And, I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning, and it says that Biden was going to warm up to Xi to ease tensions between the two countries. The only way it'll ease tension between our two countries if America capitulates on something and it's more beneficial to China. And, I don't want that guy directing any foreign policy because he's been wrong on so much of that. Let's just hope this new makeup of Congress is going to be strong enough. I'm looking at it right now. It says there's 211 Republican seats and 193 Democrat seats. So it's going in the right direction, but it sure would have been nice to have that big wave.
Well, how's the Senate looking now? Because we still have the toss-ups. Any change in that?
Dems at 48, Republicans at 49.
Yeah, that's where it was sitting last night and this morning. So we'll
Right.
have to wait. And, what I found amazing is that some of the seats that turned over were heavily, heavily Democrat. And one of them, for example, was New Jersey.
Yeah, I was surprised about New Jersey.
Yeah.
I still can't put my head around Fetterman in Pennsylvania. Doesn't talk very, very well about the people of Pennsylvania that elected that guy.
Well, it looks like it was also, this article in Town Hall says it was a bloodbath in New York, of all places. Now, I didn't get to see exactly who won, but I do know we had George Santos on, who was running for Congress. He's one of those that were openly
Right.
gay. And and he won his seat. So good going for George. So now looks like we may have a belated guest or a new guest. Let's see who is here on the line. And you are now live with Southern Sense. I'm your hostess, Annie, the Radio Chick-A-Dee, along with my guest co-host, former Congressman Ted Yoho. To whom am I speaking?
Hi, this is Dan Shyti,
Dan.
author of American Gaslighting.
Yeah. Well,
Hey, Dan, we've been promoting your book.
Hell, thank you very much.
Yeah, you have this great book, and unfortunately, Chris booked you with me only 2 days ago, so I did not have a chance to read the whole entire book, so I did some quick speed reading. But as Ted will attest, these are all things that we have been talking about on the show for the last several years about what has been going on, but you put it all down into a precise breakdown of exactly what's going on, from the changing of our history to the changing of our language, our colloquialisms, to adding in now all of a sudden capitalism is horrible, it's dangerous, it's deadly. No, but socialism and Marxism, that's always proved historically to be, very peaceful and beneficial to the people around. So, as you can tell, we're all on the same page on this one. You've had a previous books that you've written, but on this one, what got you to finally decide to encapsulate everything and put it out there?
So this is really my first foray into the political arena, as far as book writing goes. And I was sincerely motivated by a deep love for my country. I carry a lot of heritage from my parents who were immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. And the stories that they told me about what life was like in their home countries before they came to America, and then their ability to realize the American dream, and my father's absolute adoration for America and the opportunities it offered. So those things I carry with me, and so it's a really deep love for my country and wanting to have other people, everyone really, to have the opportunity to realize the same dreams. And it's not going to happen under a leftist oppressive government. It's only going to happen if we can preserve our Constitution, keep it strong, strengthen it even further from all the attacks that are happening on the Constitution, and keeping it strong for all citizens. That's the only way that other people will benefit from the same way my parents did.
Well, see, I'm only second generation American, and both my grandparents, both of my grandfathers, had actually served in World War I. One who had come from Germany, the other one come from Italy, but they served in the American Army. My late husband was actually Latvian, and the stories that they told about what was going on during World War II, just reinforced everything that I knew this country to be good about. And I am currently now dating a gentleman who was from Cuba. And his family knew the Castros. They had a wonderful life down there, and they had to flee here with just basically the shirts on their back to flee Castro. And there is example after example after example. If people just look around them and see what people have pulled themselves up from to realize the beauty and bounty of this nation. Is there going to be hatred? Yeah, we're humans. It's human nature. But what we can do is promote understanding and acceptance on all sides. And that's not what we're seeing today. We have the progressive movement, the extreme liberal left, that is promoting hatred and tearing our nation apart, where those of us on the right, we're conservative, we don't like rocking the boat too much. But I think your book is going to turn around and say, hey, listen, you can't sit back anymore. You've got to find a way to counter this and bring our nation back to where we are, where we need to be, I mean.
I agree.
Yeah, exactly. The left, which is always talking about tolerance, is actually the most intolerant group in the country. They and that's evidenced clearly by cancel culture, the way people are suppressed on social media and so forth. The minute you share a view, an opinion that is counter to the woke orthodoxy, immediately you come under attack, and then the left attempts to cancel people. So they're 100% tolerant as long as you don't disagree with them. Okay, and that's the bottom line of that.
Well, Ted and I were discussing this because I'm proud to say that YouTube banned my channel, banned the show. I managed to get back up on a different way, but I cannot even get them to hear any argument as to why it should be unbanned. And they said, no, you were spreading misinformation and mistruth. Facebook is taking down posts of mine. I posted my show on my own Tea Party page, and they took it down saying, you don't have permission to post. Wait a minute, that's my own page. I posted my show on my Tea Party page. I run both of those pages, but no. So they're finding ways to block the message. And I had mentioned to Ted that I had gotten an email from Facebook saying that they're banning any political or social issue ads prior to the election, and they just relaxed and released that ban after the election. But I have several Facebook pages, and they didn't appear on any of those other pages, just the one page, the show page. So we're finding ourselves still being countercultured.
We sure are.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing, and you have to me, the solution for social media is very, very simple. Okay. And although I am a conservative and I believe in small government, sometimes the government does have to step in and pass some regulations that make sense. So a couple of initiatives there is number one, they ought to be regulated like a public utility, meaning that they cannot ban political speech that they do not like. Okay, just like the power companies, the water companies, and so forth are all regulated. Telecom industry are regulated that way as a public utility. The next thing that people that they should do is that as far as what's considered dangerous and hateful speech, think about an individual who stands in the middle of Times Square in New York City and is espousing all kinds of cockamamie stuff, okay? And I've seen these people in various big cities, and as long as they're not threatening anyone, declaring a bomb threat or anything like that, that's a direct threat to public safety, people ought to be able to say what they want to say, because free speech doesn't mean pretty speech. Sometimes it's ugly. Sometimes people say things that are reprehensible, and that is part of free speech. We have to tolerate it. The next thing is, I don't think anyone should be allowed to have an anonymous account. Everybody's account ought to bear their real name, so then they can own the crazy cockamamie things they say, right?
Yes.
And
I don't know about that. You're asking for people to be responsible and to measure up to what they say. I agree with you. I think accountability is what it is.
Exactly. But think about the parallel to standing in the town square, right? You're clearly identifiable. Right. People see your face, right? And so it will create a direct parallel. These three initiatives will create a direct parallel to the town square principle, where in the old days, people used to stand literally on a soapbox and talk and say what they felt. So that's the nature of free speech, and that's what we ought to be doing with social media. And I don't know if it's going to come about, but we'll see.
Oh, that will definitely.
Annie, can I ask him a few questions about his book?
Oh, heck no. Never.
You bet.
Go ahead.
Dan, number one, I appreciate you being on the show, and I appreciate you writing not just that book, but your several other books on leadership. When we get to the book in question now, who, in your opinion, who is the ones behind this movement, and why are they behind this movement? What's their end game, in your opinion? We can talk about that because I've got mine. I'd like to hear it from you because I've perused the book, but I haven't been through it all the way.
Yeah. So while, I think capitalism is the best system in the world to raise people out of poverty, and the free market system in particular, and they're closely related, but they're a little bit different. Okay. Free market allows capitalism. Okay. So capitalism, there's nothing seriously wrong with it except crony capitalism. And we have now elites that have aligned and are doing the bidding of the left, okay, with the left being in power. And, people will deny it, but the deep state exists, and these people are in various agencies colluding with big tech in particular, and a variety of other industries, not just big tech, but big tech is our biggest threat to freedom because they suppress our rights to free speech, and they also shape public opinion. So those elites, to me, are the ones really behind it. And I believe that many of them are tied to the World Economic Forum. And if you go and you look at this guy, Klaus Schwab, and some of the craziest things seem to come out of Germany for some reason, okay? I don't know. Marx, Hitler, now Klaus Schwab, okay? So but basically, they're advocating a complete reset, and the installation of world government of some sort. And it's really going to become an oligarchy, is what it's going to become. And these are the people that I believe that push this, like the George Soros, Bloomberg, Bill Gates, and a variety of others that are in there. And then there's groups that benefit, that stoke all the stupidity, like the Chinese, right? The weaker and more disorganized and chaotic we become, the more that China benefits. And that is a humongous threat. And I don't think the American public is even remotely tuned in to the threat that China poses to the United States.
Not at all. They're not at all. I was in Congress for 8 years, and that was our drum that we beat all the time about China. But what you just said is how, China is the ultimate player behind this. And for the people like the Klaus Schwabs or the Larry Fink of BlackRock and Jamie Dimon, that falls into that same mindset of the one world government. And I was on a panel with the Council of Foreign Relations, and that came up, and they said, "Oh, this guy's one of those one world government." And I never said anything about it. And I says, "You're the ones that brought that up. You must be pretty sensitive about that subject." And we went downhill from then. But they really are pushing this one world government. But the end game with your Klaus Schwabs, with your Larry Fink, is if China is fomenting this and pushing this and facilitating this, if America collapses, they're not going to be better off. China is going to take over because their role is, or their belief is, China is the middle kingdom of the universe, and it is the Han Chinese that are the superior race in the world, and everybody else is inferior to that. And I mean, all you have to do is look at what they're doing now with the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and and how they are going after all these cultures within them, and that's something they've done for 4,000 years. And I don't understand why the Klaus Schwabs are pushing this unless they think they're going to be able to suppress China, which I think they're foolish to think that.
They are foolish, and many of the elites, in my opinion, are foolish, because while they are running around right now acting like the gods of the universe and the masters of the universe, they don't realize that in the end, the one that controls is the one that is willing to be the most brutal. And right. the Chinese are the most brutal. So if a Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg thinks ultimately they'll survive this and they'll be part of some grand council, okay, of ruling elite, they're dreaming, okay. And if you don't believe me,
they are
ask
delusional.
Jack. Yeah, and if you don't believe me, ask Jack Ma if you can find him. You know who Jack Ma is?
I sure do. Alibaba. Okay. That is, you're spot on that. And for these people, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos and whoever else, if they think China's going to help them solve global warming, or if they're going to fight to make equity for everybody, they're out in La La Land. They've been, I don't know what they've been sniffing or consuming, but China is there to control the world with the Han Chinese. I mean, it is written. There's a good book written by Stephen Mosher called The Bully of Asia that outlines this so succinctly. And, the 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury, and I talk about these books all the time, lays out exactly what they plan. It lays out exactly what they're doing. And all you have to do is look at the world situation and where they're at. And they're doing it. And they're very astute at it. And we need to wake up. And books like yours, I hope, will educate people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Well, like I said, I didn't get to read the whole book, so I just got through some of the synopsises. But as I was even just reading the index, I'm going, okay, yeah, we've talked about that, and we've talked about that, and yeah, we hit on that one. We have now, China has been making moves not just in places in Europe, such as Italy. They've been going now through the Middle East. No one talks about Africa. No one talks about South America, or even in the Caribbean. There's a strong foothold in Cuba. They have their hand everywhere in the world. And where is the fentanyl chemicals coming from now that is poisoning? How many Americans that have died because of fentanyl poisoning? Well, it's coming out of China. Oh, wait a minute now. Didn't the Department of Defense actually sell to China and to a company working in China the stuff for these brand new batteries that would be going into the new electric cars? Oh, yeah. And where are all these EVs going to be coming out of? Oh, gee, yeah, that's right, China. So wait a minute. No, you need the rare earth materials So what did we do to protect rare earth minerals? Oh, we gave up Afghanistan. We saw the fall of Kabul, and within 5 seconds, China was in there making negotiation agreements to do the mining of the rare earth materials that are teeming in Afghanistan, giving them a complete
Right.
foothold through the
Right.
entire Islamic Caliphate. So now they can control the Islamic Caliphate, and you've got half the world.
Right, exactly. And we don't realize that that we're basically in a slightly worse than a Cold War with China. I'm a Cold War kid. I grew up in the 70s, and I remember the Soviet Union and all the propaganda and so forth. But I don't recall it ever being such direct, intense attacks the way China is conducting itself. Basically, as you say, I have relatives in Italy, as a matter of fact, and they've told me about how they're buying up Italian companies, and they have that One Belt, One Road initiative, where they basically create slave satellite countries, through debts and obligations that they can never repay. So it is advancing rather as like a cancer, rapidly spreading cancer. We're allowing them to buy farmland in the United States, where we never challenge them, when they they impose certain conditions on American companies doing business in China, while we let them have complete access to the free market here.
Right.
It ought to be a tit for tat arrangement. Okay. If you force American companies to hand over IP over there, well, guess what? You're not going to do business in America. Right. And we have to put our foot down. We have to disengage from them economically to the greatest extent possible, starting with anything strategic, such as medicines, or this rare earth issue that they've gained complete control over the world market, in my opinion.
Yeah.
No, they do. They got 90% of our rare earths come directly from China. 90%. The other 10% come from countries that get it from China, and China is strategically placed throughout the Eurasia area, throughout Africa, throughout Central and South America. They're doing mines all over, and we have dropped the ball. America has lost the focus because we have no leadership and we have no vision long term for where our nation will be in 50 years. When I got elected, I asked John Boehner, "What's the vision for our Congress?" He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, 5-10 years down the road. He goes, "That's a lifetime in politics. We're worried about September 30th. And I was brand new and never been in politics. And I says, "What's so critical about September 30th? He goes, "We got to fund the government." And I'm thinking, your long-term vision is 9 months. And no wonder China's kicking our rear end, because my politicians in office are worried about their next election, not worried about their next generations. And it's going to be a terrible wake-up call when it does come if we don't get a hold of this. And it's something I was hoping these elections would be different, but maybe this is something that will really get the attention of the next Speaker of the House, to where they put this American First agenda, which is interesting because Trump and anybody that stood for MAGA was chastised, they were ridiculed, they were run down for America First. It's very egotistical. It's against all these other countries. Yet China has a China First policy, and they're doing it, and they're doing it very aggressively, like you said, because nobody's pushing back on them, and the media stays silent.
Yeah.
The Klaus Schwabs stay silent.
No, we were talking about China
I mean, they're.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we're talking about China, controlling our economic market here. Go into Walmart, or as I call it, Wally World. I dare people to find something being sold in Walmart that is actually made in America, not made in China. You get it from India and China, but you're not going to find many products, if any, that you can find made in America. You mentioned about buying up the farmland. Well, what about buying up our food processing plants, such as Smithfield? I used to love Smithfield. I refused to purchase it. You go on to Amazon, and you have to be careful about where you're purchasing something from. I thought I was buying something from Kentucky, and in comes the package, and everything inside it, well, I thought was being made in America, was made in China. And
Right.
I mean, I put
Not only that,
American
but it's
display
from
up, and the parts were all from China. I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Can I touch anything that's not made in China?
yeah. I bought a flag at Home Depot recently for 4th of July, and thankfully that was at least made in America.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but the thing, a lot of these things too on Amazon, okay, not only come from China, but they come from the worst part. That's the Shenzhen province, okay, where
Right.
they have slave labor, okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I really am. I bought a product recently, and I saw it was made in Shenzhen. I wanted to buy another one, and then I said, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. So,
Yep.
yeah, we have to vote with our feet, and our wallets. And if we, find ways to find alternatives to products and doing business with corporations. I was a Hulu subscriber. Disney came out with all their woke garbage. I dropped it. Okay, I don't even have cable TV anymore because most of it's garbage anyway. And so that's what we have to do, right? I don't go to professional sports games anymore, and I don't watch any on TV because they decided they wanted to embrace. The Boston Red Sox had Ibram Kendi throw out the first pitch at one of their games towards the end of the season. Okay, and they have no idea what this guy stands for, or they do, and they don't care. Okay, but to me, you put an individual like that, and you're putting your franchise's name behind him, in effect. Okay, I don't want anything to do with you, right? And that's the way it's going to remain.
Well, this is
You
where
see, what you're talking about is what we need to do on a national basis. People need to wake up, and if we start doing that, these woke companies will get the wake-up call. I saw Disney was down 30 or 13% in their revenues because people are doing exactly what you say. Let's fast forward. In your opinion, if this woke movement or gaslighting of America happens, what's America look like in the near future and for the next generations?
Well, first of all, as Ronald Reagan said, losing freedom is only one generation away, and I really am very concerned about our youth and what they're being taught in our public schools. And these folks are all going to go out into society and industry, various companies, and they're just going to carry with them the activist mentality that, promoting their cause at all costs is the right thing to do, just like, activist journalists. I think we have young people in journalism today that just do not have a clue about what it is to be a fair journalist that is responsible for holding government accountable. Right? They have just been completely absorbed. So our generation is in trouble. Our young people are in trouble. I think that we need to do our best at every level of government to support conservatives, get them into office as much as we can, and on an individual basis as well. Everybody has a part to play. Every individual in America that opposes woke ideology can take an active role by refusing to self-censor. And that's what we're doing here on this show. That's what I'm doing with my book. And I'm going to share my opinions with people. And I'm going to do what I call putting on the body armor of God and not worry about their cancellation initiatives. So we need to stop self-censoring. When you're at work, for example, and you get put through critical race theory training by your corporation, and it tells you that you're racist just because you're white, guess what? They have violated your civil rights, and you need to file a lawsuit. Okay, the civil rights are for everyone, not people with high melanin. Okay, it's for everyone, every American.
No, I think that's a great idea.
Well, you have in your book, how to push back on this. One of the things you're saying, reclaim your child's education. Well, I don't think the Chinese, when they released the Wuhan virus, anticipated the backlash from the mom and papa bears when they found out what their kids were being taught in school. I think they underestimated the American mindset in that manner, because now we're seeing school boards turning over. We see parents getting more vocal and active in their child's education because the kids were forced at home. And now suddenly the parents see what was being hidden from them before. So I think that there's one calculation the Chinese stepped on. They missed it.
Yeah, so I mean, that was if there was a silver lining, and that would be a thin one because of the devastation that COVID caused in so many families. But the parents got to see firsthand, because their kids were on these screens all day, trying to listen to their teachers, what exactly was coming to them, through video, but was being taught in the schools that they were not aware of. So it did wake up parents, and they said, what the heck are you teaching my child? But this is, it's classic leftist tactics is what it is, because if you read Marx, okay, and I've read the Communist Manifesto, okay, one of the main things is that the state gets in between the child and the parent, okay, and that's the goal. They want to take responsibility away from the parents as much as possible, and that's where the transgender issue comes in. Okay, I don't believe the left really cares about transgenders, but it's a wedge issue by which they can insert more regulation and more control. We had a wacko, and she's still in office here. She's a state legislature named Guzman, who promoted a piece of legislation she wants to promote to actually make parents who fail to affirm their child's gender identity, she wants to make them felons.
Right.
She wants to charge them with a felony.
I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the
absolute?
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say it's absolute insanity. That's it. I go back to you.
Well, are you aware of the UN Children's Bill of Rights?
No, you got me that.
I heard something about that.
The UN Children's Bill of Rights is something that it's out there. You can look it up, and when you read it, you'll be scared to death, and you think, oh, this will never happen. I've traveled around the world, and I've talked to legislative bodies around the world, and they chastise us for not signing the UN Children's Bill of Rights. And if people were to read that, it says exactly what you said. The children aren't yours. They're property of the states, basically. You can't indoctrinate them in a religion or a political belief. That is up to the state. And there's countries around the world that are doing it. So it's an insidious type of thing that's happening. It's like termites in your wall that you don't know about, and the house collapses. And, with what we've been blessed with in this country, from the documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that's given more freedom to people in the world than they've ever seen. There's an estimate that there's been over 100 billion people that have ever lived on the planet. Out of that 100 billion, there's a great book. It's called The Seven Tipping Points that Saved Humanity. That's not the right name. I'll get it for you, by Chris Smith and his brother Ted. Chris is a congressman out of Utah, and his brother's a federal judge. But in that book, it says less than 4.5% of that 100 billion people in the planet since the beginning of time have ever lived in freedom. That's how rare, that's how fleeting that is. And I've got the left and these other people, the Klaus Schwabs, that want to take that away from people. I don't want what they have to offer. It may not be perfect, what we have, but it's a hell of a lot better than what they're going to come up with. And this is something, when you see how rare freedom is in humanity, this is something I would think everybody would fight to preserve.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And, if America falls, that's it. And I use a quote in my book that was from Thomas Paine way back when, and how the cause of America is a cause of all mankind. Okay, the cause of America is in great measure the cause of all mankind. Okay, and it's so true. I mean, if America doesn't get its act together, right? There's just no return.
Yeah, well,
I agree.
Let's just
It'll
pray
be a
that
dark period.
let's just pray that there will be a awakening, and I think maybe this midterm election was the start of it. But what we're seeing coming through this election cycle, it's a little bit better than the last one, but we still see a lot of problems. We see the problems with the machines in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. I mean, and these are things that they thought they had worked out, and they didn't quite have it worked out. And I was shocked because I took, God bless my mom, she's 90. I took my mom with me to go vote. And, normally they do this in a primary. They ask you what party that you're going to be voting in. And the poll worker asked me what party I was working in a general election. And it kind of like threw me back. So even here, they've got to tweak it a little bit to make it more inclusive instead of, voter intimidation. My thought was like, well, if I say Republican, are you not going to give me a ballot? I don't know. It was just strange. We've got a lot to work on. But you've got a great book.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't know they did that, Republican or Democrat, but I've heard that story more than I've ever heard it this election cycle. When I go in there, I give them my card, says I'm a registered Republican, and they never ask me. And but I've heard that story, and I don't think it should be that way. I think they just give me the ballot. I'll vote for whoever the heck I want to vote for.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely not. Yeah, they shouldn't be asking that. And in Virginia, where I live, they just request a driver's license for your ID. We did have our state legislature pass some very liberal voting laws that basically allowed somebody to walk up and basically just say, hey, I can't prove who I am, but I want to vote. And then that becomes a provisional ballot that then gets absorbed into the system. And once you rip it out of the envelope, that's it. Okay. It is no longer identifiable. And that's the big flaw that happened with mail-in voting, and happened again in Pennsylvania, because I heard a report where they mailed out like 200,000 mail-in ballots, somewhere in that neighborhood. And, that should not be allowed, and,
shouldn't be allowed.
And in Arizona, they still haven't finished counting in Arizona. What's up with that? That's insane.
All right, Dan, our next guest is
Annie
in
and
on
I
the
were
line.
talking about that. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Our next guest is in on the line. But Dan, your book is American Gaslighting, How America is Being Systematically Taught to Hate Itself. On the show page, where I got a lot of hits in the archives, all they do is click on where it says American Gaslighting next to your name, and they can go to Amazon and get your book.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
All right, we have to have
Dan,
you back
good
on.
job.
Because
Thank you. Great talking to you.
There's so much more to talk about with you, Dan, so we definitely have to have you back on. Tell Chris, hey, that crazy lady, I want to get back on. Okay?
Okay. I will let him know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Right.
Check it
All
out.
right. Bye-bye now.
Dan Shyti, American Gaslighting is the name of the book. Check it out. We have I do believe this is our next guest. If this is Timothy Furey.
This is he. Chris,
Well, welcome aboard. I'm Annie, your hostess with the least mostest, along with my guest co-host for today, former Congressman from the great state of Florida, Ted Yoho.
The free state of Florida. Thank you. Tim, great to have you on. And I'm
even
a fan
more so now.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the London Center on Policy and Research.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the support, and we are certainly at the center big fans of everything that's gone right in Florida. I was actually speaking to some folks down there not too long ago, reminiscing about how the state went from a net exporter of jobs when it was kind of very purple in nature, to the whole Republican revolution that happened there. That's made it a place where the biggest complaint now is prices going up because everybody wants to be there. And we experienced something similar in New York as well during the Republican Revolution here. But unfortunately, that's kind of backtracked quite a bit as we see it over the past 8 years.
Well,
that's true.
I had the pleasure of having Herb London on the show several times before he passed. What a gentleman, and what a great organization he formed with the London Center for Policy Research. Your forte, though, is the Second Amendment. And because I like to know my neighbors, who's around here, whatever, I joined this thing called Next Door. And all of a sudden, we ended up in a debate on Second Amendment rights. Now, here in South Carolina, we just recently passed this year the open carry. So we now have an open carry permit here. And this one gentleman, obviously with left leanings, was furiously debating the rest of us. And they have such a twisted way of looking at what our God-given rights are in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution and why we have the Bill of Rights to protect us from government's intrusion on those God-given rights. And that is something that you have been fighting for. And one of the things you were talking about in a recent article that you have with the Second Amendment Project was about the New York Sullivan Law. Now, I got to admit, I'm a retired New York City police officer, and I found, even though the people think that cops don't like legal gun owners, I'd rather have a legal gun owner behind my back than an illegal one. Tell us about what happened in New York with the Sullivan Law.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. Yeah, so I wasn't unfortunately privy to the conversation that you just mentioned. I would have loved to have heard that, but I think it also this whole issue kind of varies depending on where you are in the country. So I was born and raised in New York City, so from where I sit, it's very different. I think the laws here, I don't think there's anyone on any side of the aisle that would go on record and say that these laws are in any way protect any definition of civil rights, right? I don't think there's anybody willing to go on record saying that these aren't racist, anti-immigrant, and a whole various slew of things that we just don't tolerate anymore as a civilized society. So the Sullivan Law goes back to the year 1911, where the governor at the time had basically looked at this growing problem of New York being this hub of immigrants, growing communities of color, the Italians, a lot of labor unrest going on, and it was like, we have a problem with these communities having access to firearms. And so they passed the Sullivan Law, which basically allowed local police jurisdiction to have discretion when it comes to licensing. And we talk a lot when it comes to the issue of just carry, but it's beyond that. In New York, it's possession. And even possession is defined very broadly speaking. So if you literally put your finger on a pistol in the state of New York, just touch it with your pinky, you have now committed a Class D felony, right? So it just goes beyond whether you can walk through Times Square with a handgun on your hip. It's whether you can fundamentally own a firearm in your home. And that's what the issue has been. And so through a series of lawsuits, many years ago, I actually was part of a lawsuit that went up and wasn't taken by the Supreme Court. And probably, I was probably for the best now, given the current composition of the court and how that worked out with the Brewing case that we just saw. But there was definitely a need for change. And now what's happened is the Governor Hochul, who just won re-election earlier this week, she actually, in response to the Supreme Court's Brewing decision, made gun ownership even more difficult in the state of New York. So we expect this to be, let's say, an iterative process going back to the courts and likely knocking down a lot of these new laws.
Yeah. Now, there's now a move.
Boy, that's surely needed.
There's a move, I think it's Hochul's law that she passed, or whatever she's trying to push, is that you have to surrender your social networking postings. So what you say up on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, if they deem it's not of good moral character, you will be denied access to or a permit for a firearm.
Absolutely. So what they did was they basically changed the discretionary just cause, right, that you have a just cause to do it, to the discretionary good moral character. So again, they kept it a discretionary system. And one of the ways they'll determine that is this 3 years of social media access. And I'm not even sure what that means, because let's say if you report these accounts, but the accounts are locked, right? What good does that do? So now you're going to have to provide access to your local police force. And then becomes the issue of what they do with it. And this is kind of a right-left issue. Right and left are on the same side here, because, well, we just came through 18 months of a lot of protests for the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So if you're one of these people that say we needed to defund the police, I don't see why your local police force wouldn't deem you not qualified to have a permit, right? That only makes sense. How can you, and it goes deeper than that, because as you look through, and I just did this because I'm going to be testifying down at One Police Plaza this coming Friday, so I read all the 49 pages of changes to the law that they're proposing, is that where they say that you have to be, let's say, I forget the exact wording, but in line with, good law and order. Well, what is that? I mean, if you don't, support the next pay package increase for the local police force, are you qualified? I mean, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes through this where, again, the level of discretion is exactly what the Supreme Court was trying to take away, and they just repackaged it and put it right back out there.
And it's going to end up back at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to throw it right back out. But they're always finding different ways. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's what, too. I thought, growing up and being part of this fight for a long time now, I think this was the first issue that I testified before a body on, I think when I was 18 years old. And, I told them at the time, I actually warned them at the time that the more you keep ratcheting up these laws, the more you are creating a package that could be defeated at the highest level of the courts. And so what you're going to do by continuing to do this is bring down the gun control movement nationwide. And that's exactly what happened, not to pat myself on the back here, but the gun control movement as a whole basically saw the ground that they stand on fall out from under them. And they could have prevented this. So there's little things that they may be able to do, but by and large, the vast majority of their main policy proposals just wouldn't stand. And to your point on the courts, I thought, my whole thing for over 20 years now was that, no matter what the NYPD or the New York State Police did with regards to licensing, if they put up a sign on the door that said blacks need not apply, right, a New York court would uphold that, right? There was no way a New York court would deem a New York gun law unconstitutional, no matter what it was. And now we have seen for the first time in my short life where I think every case that's gone up against the new laws has won, which is unprecedented. Now, these will still work their way up the court system, but the Hochul administration, I think, has lost 100% of the challenges so far. And I mean, that in itself is a shift that I would not have seen possible in my lifetime.
Well, people don't understand
that's a welcome shift.
Well, how odious the gun laws have been in New York State. And when I retired back in 1996, it was for line of duty injuries. I had actually lost full use of my right arm. I had to prove to them that I could still handle the firearm and fire it, even though I still did not have full use of the arm. Otherwise, I would have been, like any other citizen, unable to prove I needed one and be able to own one. It was only for the grace of God that, I have my ID. But here in South Carolina, God bless the freedom that we have here. I was able to travel from South Carolina to Kentucky with my firearm. Nashville. Nashville, Tennessee. I have to remember what state it's in. Boy, am I losing my mind today. I had traveled to a conference in Nashville, and I was able to map my route based upon reciprocity. What other states can I travel through that I know that my South Carolina permit would allow me to carry it in that state too? And I had no problems. This is the right that our Constitution gives us, but the anti-gun group has twisted everything. Every single time there is a mass shooting or something, oh, you see that? Guns are dangerous. But we have the argument, I'm sorry, I can go outside, put the gun down on the chair by my front door, walk away. That gun's not going to get up and go shooting people randomly. It's the person that holds it. And that's where we have to concentrate. But that brings up a slippery slope here now, Tim. Red flag laws.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I'm going to have a little bit of my focus around, it's going to be a little bit New York City centric. And the reason for that, I think that's important, is because your listeners, I think, need to kind of know the broader implications of what could happen. Because New York didn't exactly get where it was overnight. It was a bunch of politicians over time that said, look, we just want, a certain number of laws. We want registration so that we know who owns what. Don't worry. And then, again, politicians don't last forever. A new crop comes in, and then they take that infrastructure and use it for other things. So this is what needs the viewers to understand of where this all leads to. And I think I'm not one of these people who thinks we should just hand everybody guns and it be a free for all, right? I am one for true common sense gun laws, right? I think there is a middle ground and a certain reasonableness where certain minor restrictions, right, that doesn't take too much of your time or efforts, can lead to better societal effects, right? But the problem is, on the gun control side, when you go to them and say, look, there is no reason to have these crazy laws, like the last Supreme Court, before Bruen, the case that went up to the Supreme Court on guns was another New York case, where New York gun owners are being told that you can't, even though you're fully licensed, you cannot go to New York, to New Jersey, or any other state and compete in a shooting competition. What is the point of that? There's no common sense there. It makes no sense, and it's just designed to basically have a situation where somebody loses their license for breaking some stupid law or put them in prison. And what we should have seen there, and this goes for all kinds of other laws, is the gun control lobby come together and say, listen, we want to save lives. These laws don't save lives. Therefore, we stand with the gun rights people to get these off the books. And we don't see that. And so they lose credibility as well, as being people that just want to protect the children versus people that just want to ban guns. And I think they do themselves a disservice, as well as the broader movement that I think we're all part of having responsible ownership and saving lives.
I agree with you.
It's such a crazy hodgepodge that we're facing now. I even lost my train of thought. When I was on this online debate with this numbnuts, no other way to describe him, he was pulling out statistics saying that the more guns you put out there, the more crime there is. But yet, in the Second Amendment project, you prove the exact opposite. So what they can do is they can go to any willy-nilly site and say, all right, well, this statistic proves my point. So you're looking for a solution to fit your argument rather than looking at the argument and finding a solution for it, putting the cart before the horse. Whereas you've done your homework and proved between a 27-year period the difference in the population growth and the decrease in crimes involving firearms actually occurs with legal gun ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the guys that work with the center, for instance, Tim Wilson, have definitely taken up the mantle of looking at the data with regards to gun use, both legal and illegal gun use. And this is on top of the work, the decades-old work that's been done by Professor John Lott. I recommend folks looking up his series of books. He's definitely the leader in econometric analysis of this particular issue. And that's absolutely true. I mean, you do see, with the proper gun licensing scheme, or lack thereof, where folks can use firearms in a proper way. Now, I would also like to say that everybody keeps talking about gun violence. And let's be clear that when you have people who are licensed to own firearms, you will have more gun violence than if you had, let's say, magically can remove all guns in themselves. But that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Let me give you an example. If you had, let's say, a woman who shoots somebody who's trying to rape her, that is an act of gun violence. But I would argue that that's a positive societal effect there, right? So you have to really look at the numbers. And what a lot of the gun control folks do is really, what they consider, let's say, a child, so to speak, right? Is somebody up to the age of 27, and all these other things that they do to pad the figures. And so you're right. I think that you really have to be careful of what data you look at, and I urge any of the listeners to check out some of the stats that we've worked on. And one of the other points I think that you raised previously that I'm sorry I didn't answer is you mentioned the issue of the red flag laws, and this is an issue of this whole new growth in regulations where you're basically taking somebody's firearms away without any form of due process. And this is, again, a very slippery slope. So this is one of the things I'm in looking over the regs in New York, where they're saying, like, the language is, if you're involved in an incident, right? Well, I mean, if I'm protesting or whatever, I mean, anything could be necessarily an incident, and then I'm supposed to call the licensing division and turn myself in, saying that, I was involved in this. And if not, and this is almost where it is, if they call me and they say, hey, listen, you were at this protest, you didn't tell us about that, that was an illegal protest, we're now revoking your license for the rest of your life, because not necessarily because you were there part of that protest where we may have otherwise suspended you for 6 months, but because you didn't tell us that you were part of it. You were involved in an incident that wasn't reported. So, and that's a further iteration on the whole red flag laws. That's where the red flag laws will probably go towards. So we need to have a process in place where folks, go through a due process, because, and what I would actually say to this is maybe the way to couch this too is, all right, so would you say that people who are involved in this should, lose their right to vote or other civil rights as well? Because they should be treated the same, right? We can't do as Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said, you cannot treat the Second Amendment as a second-class right. And that's
I think you're right.
To happen.
If I can weigh in there, Annie, on the red flag laws, because when I was in Congress, I was a member of the Second Amendment caucus, and we had these kind of debates up there. And of course, we just had that Marjorie Stoneman shooting in Florida, and here was a young kid that had over 41 incidents with the FBI and the law enforcement, and I push for, we have to be proactive in some of these things, but when you get to red flags, who starts deciding what's aberrant behavior, as you just pointed out? I was in D.C. on January 6th for business, but I didn't participate in the protest. It wasn't an insurrection that I saw. And we're in D.C., and I'm a Trump supporter, believe in the Constitution. I could be put on a red flag law. And you look at the speech that Biden gave, if you're a MAGA supporter, you're unpatriotic, you're against this country. Those are the dangerous areas that we're approaching in this country. And that's why we have to have clear thought on this and definitions. And, if you think back when Obama was there, he was talking about the wealthy, they were going to put the wealth tax in, and he says nobody needs to make more than $250,000 a year. I don't want government deciding those kind of issues for me, and surely not on the Second Amendment. That was put there for a very good reason by the founders.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think and actually one of the things that we've discussed at the center, because we're trying to envision ways to actually provide policy suggestions on these issues, is that there should be a accountability if you're, let's say, making these charges, for instance. So let's say if somebody's going out and filing restraining orders or other things like that, well, if the court equally finds that those were unfounded, then there should be charges put against the people filing them as well, right?
Exactly.
These things have serious consequences. And I'm actually surprised that the gun control lobby hasn't done this. If they can get a list of let's say, gun owners in a certain community. They just go to the court and say, look, Jim Jones threatened me. Sally, looked at me the wrong way. I want a restraining order. And once that order is, whether it's restraining order or, under the conditions the red flag law is issued, and usually judges give this out as candy, because it's like, yeah, look, if something happens and I didn't give the order, right, I can be held accountable. So maybe just give it to everybody. Like they could just wipe out the gun control movement just by sitting at the courthouse filing this against everybody. Then once they get the order, call up the ATF and say, look, you have somebody who is in violation of federal law, and then you nail them for that, even if it's unfounded. Right. That's crazy. But that's the way things are right now. And so
you lose all due process is gone. Yeah, you lose your due process.
Yeah, well,
there is no due process.
Well, I've talked about this on the show several years ago when the red flag laws first came out. There was a married couple, I believe it was in California. She was on Paxil, which is one of these things to help people with mood control. Sometimes also it's used if you're used in extreme amount of pain. It helps to control the pain, believe it or not. But she was on the medication Paxil. He was a legal licensed gun owner. Well, they found out that while she's on this mental medication, the Paxil, there's a gun in the house. So the law enforcement removed the gun because she was on the medication. Even though he had it locked and secured where she couldn't get to it, there was a gun in the house and she was on medication, and therefore that was the reason they pulled the gun. It is so easy for them to do it. As you said, all they need is a list of permit holders. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't New York try to release the list of permit holders just a couple of years ago? And Judge Jeanine Pirro's name was on it. We've seen attempt after attempt after attempt. These are little facts I'm pulling out off the top of my head. But you can have a dispute with your neighbor over too loud a lawn. Your leaf blower is just too loud at 6 a.m. You get into a pissing contest with your neighbor or someone you don't like. You can go anonymously to a judge, get the restraining order, have the firearms removed, and now the poor legal gun owner, if they can afford to, has to go through a costly legal battle. But if you're some poor schlop, who doesn't have the finances or have the insurance coverage to pay for those finances, will never get their gun back. And there is no due process. You can't face your accuser because it's anonymous. And these things are so horrible.
Yeah, I think, and ways to maybe, mitigate a lot of this is saying, look, if you're going to take a gun owner's permit away, you have to provide them with an attorney if they can't afford one or choose not to pay for it, in the same way if they were arrested for a criminal offense, right? Mm-hmm. So this way you start shifting the cost of this back to the state. Again, because if they can just create all these headaches and costs and worries for gun owners, that just makes participating as a legal gun owner all the more difficult. I mean, again, if you own a firearm illegally, and again, what is legal and illegal varies greatly. So I think we should even be careful when we talk about illegal guns, because a gun, let's say in Pennsylvania, owned by a licensed firearm instructor, if they accidentally, venture off into New York, all of a sudden that's an illegal gun. Mm-hmm. I would argue that gun's no more dangerous to society than it was 10 minutes before. But if you, in New York, I would suggest, especially let's say with rifles and shotguns, that you're better off, especially if you're a low-income individual or a person of color, you're better off owning firearms illegally, that you should not go through the licensing process, because you put yourself in far more danger than if you actually abided by the law. And that's just fundamentally not the way it should be in a civil society.
Yeah, because I remember when I was in NYPD, the requirement was that when you went home with your weapon, they preferred that you left them locked in your locker. But if you did travel home, as soon as you got home, you had to put a lock on the gun so no one could operate it. And gee, that's really great, because now your neighbor is being murdered next door. You go to go to the aid of the neighbor. But, oh, wait a minute, I got to find my keys and unlock the gun and pull it out of whatever container or lockbox they forced you to carry it in to begin with. So by the time you get to your legal firearm and you are a police officer, your neighbor's dead. And now you are going to be responsible for not responding in time. It is such a legal slippery slope that New York State has placed on it. But New York's not the only one. You've got other liberal states that have strict gun laws, and they're trying to make them even worse by using any and every method possible to reduce our Second Amendment. Oh, wait a minute. Let's throw in the issue of, it says to keep a well-armed militia. So now, if you're not part of a militia, I'm sorry, you can't own a gun.
Mike, I had this. We've had some thought discussions on the whole militia issue too, because this is something that was brought up by the gun control lobby for many years now, and I've kind of countered with that of, is that really the argument you want to go with? Because just bear with me for a minute. If you come out and then say, all right, well, we've got all the federal laws under Biden. He passes all these new laws, and Texas is sitting around, and all right, so what do we do about this? It's like, okay, fine. All of our citizens beyond the age of 18 are now members of the Texas militia. Therefore, all federal laws fall away, right? Problem solved. But I mean, now this would obviously be up to the state to decide, but I'm not quite sure why states like Wyoming or Montana haven't actually tried this already, of just saying that, all right, all able-bodied men and women who aren't murderers or rapists or whatever they decide are members of the militia. I can't then see how the federal government can come in and say what people can and cannot own, right? And nobody's told me otherwise. So I'm not quite sure why, some of the states that have been more adventurous with things like constitutional carry haven't thought about that as well.
Well, we can go on for
That's really
hours
a good point
with this.
to bring up.
But it looks like our next guest is in on the line. I'm assuming. If it is, please, I'm asking him to press 1 on his keypad so I do know that it is him. But people can find you at the London Center for Policy Research, which is londoncenter.org. And Tim Furey, you've got great articles up there. Your guys are doing great work. And thank you for being there in the fight. And good luck on your testimony over at 1PP.
Thank you both so much for the time. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Timothy. Good talking to you.
All right.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Now we have, if I can get my little thing to work here. Here we go. And let us bring on Pete Sepp with the National Taxpayer Union. Good afternoon, Pete. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, well,
Hey, Pete, this is Ted Yoho. Good to have you.
Absolutely, sir. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
We're looking to see if Mark Tapscott is going to be able to call in, because he is driving with his wife up to, I think he said he was going to North Carolina. So hopefully Mark will be able to pop in or not, depending upon if he's on the road. But I was going through a lot of the stuff that you have on your website, and man, have you opened up my eyes to a lot of different things that are going on here. There was a 20-page report that I downloaded, if I can get my hands on it. Oh, here we go. Here we go. A paper that you guys wrote back in September dealing with the anti-inflation agenda that respects U.S. taxpayers, workers, and businesses. And some of these statistics that you have on your report here, that was by Andrew Lutz, the policy paper, was something that I didn't know about this, but I was fighting a sales tax here in my local county. And I'm seeing that everything I wrote in the fight against the sales tax is what you have here in this thing. And I said, well, unfortunately, it passed by about 4,000 votes. I didn't succeed. But I was glad to see that what I was saying is actual fact. The numbers are the same. You talk about the consumer price index for urban consumers. Now, always curious, why do they always tie it to urban consumers instead of all consumers?
Well, right, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and especially considering that there are special factors for non-urban consumers, seniors, those who might be in a small business environment where their supply chains are getting much, much costlier and they have to pass that along. So there are many different measurements of inflation that might make sense to a given person beyond the so-called CPIU index.
Now, there's also another index which the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis puts out, is the personal consumption expenditures. How is that different from the CPIU?
Well, personal consumption expenditures measure a different basket of goods, and they also tend to measure trends in the economy that are forward-looking rather than backward-looking like CPIU might be. By having personal consumption expenditure measurements in the mix, you can kind of get a better view of what might be on the horizon in consumer buying patterns going forward. And by using these measurements, CPIU, PCE, the whole alphabet soup of measurements, you then get to understand that the federal government itself, and by extension taxpayers, start to suffer from inflation. After all, the federal government does purchase goods and services funded by taxpayers. There are federal programs that are tied to various measurements of inflation. After all, there's a totally different measure that certain pay raises are pegged to in the federal government, certain benefit programs, Social Security, certain wage and other thresholds for tax purposes might also get adjusted somewhat differently. And so all of these things create fiscal impacts in the federal government. Just as an illustration, the Congressional Budget Office put out a report in March of this year saying, well, what's going to happen at basic projections of inflation that we are making over the next 10 years or so to the federal budget because of all those inflation factors I mentioned? And next year, for example, $143 billion of additional deficit spending is going to occur because of higher inflation rates. That's CBO's projection for the coming year. An extra $143 billion added to the deficit because we are yet to be able to get inflation under control.
Now, why should we worry about the size of the debt?
Well, I have an old saying that the national debt doesn't matter at all until suddenly, spectacularly, it does. And that's what we're looking at here. The United States is, unfortunately, you cannot escape the fate that other nations have had to put up with when it comes to over-borrowing. Yes, we are a world staple currency. Countries around the globe look to us for financial stability. They peg their own systems to our own. But even the United States can reach a limit where investors around the world and inside the United States say, we don't believe in the full faith and credit of the federal government anymore. We are going to demand much, much higher interest rates if the federal government wants to borrow money from us. And in fact, interest rates are going up, and interest costs just to service the current national debt are going way, way up. We are looking at, by the end of the decade, a $1 trillion debt service cost. $1 trillion or more just to keep the national debt serviced. That is not only zero value to the American taxpayer. It's not paying for a single federal program, but it's also draining money out of the productive economy.
You know,
Andy, can I weigh in here?
Go, please do, Ted.
Pete, I really appreciate you bringing that up, and that was, one of our subjects that we just hammered. That in China seemed like an ag policies, but it's just so nonsensical up there. The mindset of these people, they know the debt is growing. And just real briefly, when I ran against my opponent, he went into the service in 1889 in congressional service. Our debt was around and he got out when I beat him in 2013. Our debt was right at $13.5 trillion. And when I got out of Congress, it had morphed to $28 trillion, and now we're at $31 trillion. And that's not speaking of the unfunded liability. It is unsustainable. And as you said, the debt is not a problem until it is. And it's one of those things, you either deal with debt while you can and proactively, or debt will deal with you. Either way, it will be dealt with. And you have where you were writing in some of your policy papers about the pay-go. And that was a big issue while we were up there. It had to meet the pay-go standards. So, we had the sequester in there, and John Boehner, he was just, that was the worst thing we ever did. But it was maybe from a leadership standpoint, from him trying to move stuff forward, but it was also a way that we put brakes on the spending, and we had cut spending back, and we had taken a lot of spending out, but yet there were so many programs on automatic that kept the debt going up and up and up because they weren't enforcing pay-go like they should have. And then what you brought up about just servicing our debt, which means the interest we're paying on our debt, we're paying more servicing the debt, the interest payments on our debt today than we're spending on our military. We've crossed that bridge. And in your opinion, how long can this go on? Number two, is it possible to turn that curve backwards? And three, if we don't do that, what is the outcome, in your opinion?
Well,
that was a lot.
Yes, I would say, first of all, no, we can't go on like this. Our debt as a percentage of our annual economic output is now above 100%. That should be a danger sign. Have other nations in the industrialized world lived with more debt? Yeah, sure. Japan is one at 140, 150%. But are we willing to live with the so-called lost decade or lost 2 decades that Japan went through when their banking system collapsed, their debt got out of control? I mean, if we are worried about a recession now, we should take a look at Japan and see how they suffered with losses of wealth. I mean, Japan Incorporated became Japan Bust. And we don't want that to happen to the United States. So my guess is that there is a finite amount for the U.S. to be in debt, and it's less than what Japan has as a percentage of its economy, precisely because so many other countries have pegged their currencies and their economic systems to us. We have to have a lower percentage of GDP than what other countries have been able to carry at that 140, 150% level. I don't think we can reach that and still be prosperous. What can we do about it? Well, we have to start turning away from overspending. This business of first the CARES Act, then the supplemental appropriations bills, the consolidated appropriations, the American Rescue Plan Act. The national debt has risen something like 33% in the past 4 years. That's just absolutely mind-boggling. It's not only the amount of debt, it's the rate at which we're accumulating it. And the important point here is, if we're staring down a recession, and if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Keynesian economist, when you say, well, the federal government will need to step in with huge infusions of cash if we're in a recession, we're going to have to be prepared for that. How do we have the fiscal space to do that now? I don't think we do. If there is,
we don't have the wiggle room, no.
That's right. How in the world are we going to do that if there's another severe economic downturn? And so we have to get ahead of this curve right now, and not just in the next Congress. We may have an opportunity in the coming duck session to say, okay, some of the discretionary spending caps that we had in place and are still written into law, we have to start obeying them. It's not going to be fun or easy. Otherwise, we would have done it years ago. but we have to make the effort. It doesn't mean we have to have zero deficit in 5 years or even 10. We just have to get started down that path. That alone will send a signal to investors and markets that we're finally trying to get a handle on this problem.
Well,
I go ahead, Annie.
Well, I said, from my short lifetime, I remember when Nixon took us off the gold standard, and I thought that it was a huge mistake. Our money at one point had a physical backing. And then when we started the Tea Party movement, everyone was talking about quantitative easing. But I don't think that's ever stopped. We're still printing money that has no backing to it. It's phony currency, basically. And who's buying up our debt? China. Again, this is something else, Ted, that we were talking about with China, how much they are so insidiously involved in our government, our businesses, our education, but controlling our debt with their yen. Chinese want to use the yen as the worldwide currency instead of the U.S. dollar. We have done so many things wrong, but oh wait, according to President Biden, the Federal Reserve will rescue us. Is that going to work?
No, I don't think so. The one thing he's right about, I think, is that the Federal Reserve can have a bigger impact on inflation in the economy, good or bad, than Congress can. In many cases, the best thing Congress can do is just stop doing what it's doing now rather than doing anything proactively. But it's an interesting point you make about the gold standard. Our founder, James Dale Davidson, used to speak about this a lot, that once we went off the gold standard, it became a whole lot easier for the Fed and political leaders to simply inflate their way out of deficit spending. And unfortunately, you don't really do that. What you do is you temporarily make the size of the deficit look a little smaller, but it keeps piling up on the back end. And that's what we've seen since we've gone off the gold standard. It's become very easy to create deficits and mask their true size.
Well, for a long, long time, a dollar was worth a dollar. A dollar, say in 1870, 30 years later, is still worth a solid dollar. But today, our dollar is more like, the last I heard was somewhere around 10 cents of what it would have bought back then. Our ability to purchase has shrunk. We're still getting paid the same dollars, but they actually have less value. And I don't think that's what people understand. Yeah. And it's very easy to say right now, well, all we can do is throw up our hands and hope it all resolves itself. No. Certainly the Federal Reserve has a lot to do with the way our economy turns, but there are things we can do in the near term. We need to start clawing back some of the federal spending under the American Rescue Plan Act that remains unspent but has been appropriated. Imagine if we say we're not. Oh, this is
yes.
This is what I was going. I have that page is open, all red, underlined. The agenda that you have, which is an 8-step agenda that you recommend to help slow down the inflation and bring our economy back under the control. And the number one thing is what Biden did when within hours of getting into office, he shut down our energy industry. We've got to get that back.
Yes, it only makes sense that if we allow the supply to meet the demands of the market, then prices are going to find an equilibrium, a level that's below now, because right now there are artificial constraints on energy production. The president can say it all he wants, that, there's a record number of permits that have been issued, and no worries, there's going to be plenty more oil flowing. I don't think so. Certainly not in the United States, and certainly not when they say on the one hand, we're going to have permitting reform to allow more drilling, but then on the other hand say, let's enact a windfall profit tax on the oil industry because they're making too much money. You can't do both of those things and have a consistent policy.
Well, what they fail to understand is, you can tax the companies, but who ends up in the long run actually paying that tax? The businesses are only just a funnel from the consumer to government. So, of course, the prices, you increase the tax, the prices are going to increase. So, again, it falls on our back, not on the back of the corporation. And they fail to understand that. Price controls do the same thing. You were talking about, and this is a favorite of mine, incentives for people to save for the long term. If you recall, in my young life, I voted for him. Ronald Reagan had a proposal to privatize Social Security by getting people to have these personal savings accounts to take the place of Social Security. Why can't we do that? Take Social Security away from the federal government. You can't cut off the people that are already receiving it, but what you can do is incentivize the generations that are coming up behind us to save their money so they're not dependent upon government.
Yes, absolutely. And, you think back at all of the missed opportunities, Ronald Reagan with personal savings accounts, or you think of that funny little guy with the Texas twang, Ross Perot, who had his charts about the federal deficit, and we have to remember that was 1992 when he was sounding the alarm, about 30 years ago. What has happened in 30 years to our nation's finances? And imagine if we had taken just a few steps back then, things like discretionary spending caps, some limited entitlement reforms. Imagine if we had done things to our energy production back then, and we would be far more energy secure at this point in time. All it would have taken were a few small graduated steps, and we would be in so much better shape now.
Well, you talk about adjusting the provisions in the tax code. I would go actually one step further and initiate the fair tax, so that it's not a flat tax is going to hurt the guys on the low end. Because if you're paying 10% in a tax, a guy earning $30,000, it's going to be harder to tax him at 10% with some guy that's earning $300,000. It hurts the guy in the low end because he can't afford that money. That's why I say a fair tax. And then you voluntarily pay the tax based upon what you purchase. That is a perfect way to help stimulate the economy. I'm sorry, Ted, go ahead.
Thanks. That's a whole conversation in itself on that, going back to the tax thing. But Pete, you brought up, where we are with the amount of debt we have, and it was the rate that amount of debt went up. But then you add on to that the rise of the debt, and then the rate of the interest increase. We went from virtually about 0.5% interest that the federal government was paying, correct me if I'm wrong on that, to where we're at today. And that increase was so fast, there's no way we can catch up to that. The other thing that's really helped America and the American dollar and the security of that is it's the world current reserve or reserve currency. But with the deal that Saudi Arabia just made with China on petroleum, and they're going to take payments in Chinese currency, we're seeing this movement around the world to get away from American currency because of our policies, whether they're the environmental or the social or just our foreign policies. People want to get away and decouple from America. This is a very dangerous point that we are in America as far as our finance and the security of this nation. And I truly believe the biggest threat to America outside of ignorance of the electorate about who we are as a nation is our debt. Number two is China. And we need to deal with that. And you were talking about putting fiscal restraints on our spending. Being there for the 8 years I can tell you right now, the congressional people, the majority of them, will not vote for a cut in spending because it's going to be fodder for the next election to be used by their opponent. we try to put in the work requirements in the foods, in the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's coming up and again. And we had the House, we had the Senate. We were in control in the Senate when that bill came up. We could not put in the minimum work requirements of 20 hours a week for a recipient of food stamps if you were what we called ABODs, which is an able-bodied adult with no dependencies or no disabilities. And all we were asking is 20 hours a week getting re-educated, 20 hours a week of volunteering. And, we wanted these reforms put in there. With us in charge, we could not get that passed through the Republican House or the Senate. In fact, Chuck Grassley was in charge of that on the ag side on appropriations, and he turned that over to Debbie Stabenow. And it was a lost opportunity to start curbing some of the entitlement programs. And it's not just the entitlement programs, it's some of these other programs that were going, education. I mean, we could look at every department and you could probably save 5 to 10% in any of them, but they're afraid to do that because the narrative for the politician is, oh, he cut this program, they cut this program. How do we get beyond that? How do you do that without having the crisis dictating the austerity measures that are going to be forced on in the American population?
Yeah, it's a good question. I frankly think that it's going to take some combination of spending caps that are going to have to be enacted over a period of a few years, and they're going to have to be things that kick in automatically. We were talking earlier in the program about John Boehner and saying how bad the so-called sequester was, the automatic spending reductions, worst thing we ever did. Well, I'd agree, except the only thing worse than that was doing nothing, and nothing is what would have happened without them. That's the reality.
So bad up there. And he said, it'd be over my dead body if sequester ever happens. And about 2 months later, it happened, and he was still there. He didn't die. But there's just that aversion to change those programs, and they have to. And we elect people to be leaders up there to make those tough calls and explain to the American taxpayers, but they fail to do that. And if we don't do it, we know it's going to happen. The debt's not going away, and you either deal with debt or debt will deal with you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the experience of the states can be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. What would happen if we lost the dollar as a world currency? What would happen in your mind in a projection of 2 or 3 years from now, the economic situation of America?
Oh, I think there would be a rapid escalation in all of the problems associated with our continuous borrowing, because without us having that status as the world's currency, there would be quite a number of investors saying, well, why in the world am I stashing my money in the U.S. economy and buying up its debt anymore? They're going to go someplace else. And suddenly, debt that we're now financing at 4 or 5% could be financed at 20, 30%. Borrowing will become prohibitively expensive for the federal government. That means raising taxes to cover the spending. Well, that's going to slow the economy even worse, and we go into a downward spiral. We might be actually forced to reform spending, but we don't want to get to that point.
We don't, and there should be adults in the room that says, listen, America, this is where we're at, and have that talk with the American people. And, those programs that came out with COVID, I voted for the first one because there was so much confusion. But the other ones I didn't vote for because I'm like, no, you just need to open up the economy and it'll take care of itself. But there was a Democratic colleague of mine. We were on a conference call. It was a bipartisan call. And he says, you guys aren't asking for much money. You're asking for $1 or $2 trillion. You need to ask for $10 trillion. And they wanted to spend. And it was just like, thank God that guy's not in Congress anymore.
Wow. $10 trillion. It's hard to
Oh,
imagine.
yeah. I mean,
how
they couldn't spend enough. I read a report that I think it was, I forget the percentage, but it was basically 30% of the money in circulation today has been printed in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. When federal government prints money and it's not backed by a precious metal or anything, it's just the faith of the federal government, how much does that devalue the dollar I held today? And now there's 30% more of the same dollars, but there's no value added to that. How much does that decrease that dollar I used to have?
Yeah, it has to, unless you're one of those those subscribers to modern monetary theory, which is basically just trying to turn thousands of years of human economics on its head. It has to have an impact. It has to.
Well, talking about the Federal Reserve and the people that are in charge of these things, Jerome Powell came and talked to us. And he says, we don't have to worry about our debt. We've got a growing economy. It's not going to be an issue. We don't even have to be concerned with it. And I told him, I said, sir, you're scaring the hell out of me, because at some point you're going to have to deal with this. Our economy won't always be good. The interest rates aren't always going to be suppressed like they are. And if that starts ticking up, we can't stay up with it. And he goes, oh, that won't ever happen. Now, this is the guy that's in charge of the Federal Reserve under a Republican and a Democrat. And that was his mindset. And I'm like, why are these people even in control of these situations? That there needs to be somebody that we can put in there with rational thought.
Oh, that's asking a lot.
Absolutely. And yes. And here, and let's remember, the bigger amount of money we have to borrow right now at these lousy interest rates, the longer that debt service at bad, unfavorable conditions is going to be with us. If we have to borrow $1 trillion or $2 trillion next year at an interest rate of 4 or 5%, that's going to stick with us for a couple of decades, the cost of servicing that money. So when borrowing is this expensive, we have an especially good incentive to spend less.
Well, I hope there's members of Congress listening to you.
Well, Pete, I'm going to come back to Biden's statement that the Federal Reserve will get us out of this mess, basically, by increasing the interest rates. But that also has a opposite effect. The higher the interest rate goes and Americans live on their credit cards, the less they're going to have money to spend. They are going to be paying higher monthly payments now on those credit cards. And heaven forbid, if you don't have a fixed rate mortgage already in place prior to this inflation and upcoming recession, I say personally that we are in a recession. But now mortgage rates are going to become prohibitive, especially for first-time home buyers. It will now have a snowball effect in the opposite direction if we do not do something now, correct?
Yes, absolutely the case. And let's remember, too, that if we have another economic downturn and even the cheap mortgages or relatively cheap ones financed at low interest rates become unaffordable for folks who have lost their jobs and they simply can't maintain their mortgages, who's stuck with a lot of that mortgage debt? Taxpayers, through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, through FHA loans, even through Veterans Administration loans. That money is guaranteed by us, the American taxpayers.
Yeah. And then you throw in now the craze of reverse mortgages. A neighbor of mine passed away over 2 years ago, and the house has been sitting vacant. That does nothing to increase property values, but yet you're paying a high mortgage, your property value is decreasing. So you lose principal in what you have. So even if you try to borrow against your principal in your house, you have none left. So again, it spirals in such a manner that the normal American public doesn't understand this.
Yeah,
No, they
until they're in the middle of it.
Pete, I was talking to fairly wealthy friend of mine or an acquaintance of mine, and he's lived in 3 foreign countries, from South Africa on, to where their currency collapsed, and it went from 100% of the value down to 20%, and the government issued an edict that said you have 30 days to cash in your money, and if not, it's going to zero. Do you see a scenario like that happening here in America? And if so, how far? What would trigger that?
Well, it can happen here. I certainly hope it doesn't happen here. It may not happen here as quickly because of the size of our economy, the fact that there still are investors who believe in the United States' economic strength. But we should not be so arrogant as to think it will never take place here.
Right.
If we keep borrowing at $2 to $3 trillion a year at the current interest rates, if we do nothing about our giant benefit programs and say, well, we'll just wait until the trust funds are exhausted and we'll raise taxes every year to pay for them. If we get that far down the line, we could find ourselves in a hyperinflationary spiral where the federal government will start saying we're only going to pay 20 or 30 cents on the dollar of claims because that's as much as we can tax the economy without totally collapsing the entire thing. We don't want to be doomsday mongers here, but we also don't want to get we don't want to get complacent though and say, we're the United States, can't ever happen to us. No, economics and common sense can catch up with us in a nasty way.
Well, now I have a...
Well, it did in Germany.
Yeah.
Pre-World War II, when they got complacent there, I mean, it got nonsensical. And Annie, let me just finish this thought, if I may. I know it's your show. If you take credit, and growing up as a young married couple, we used our credit cards unwisely, and so we we used it to buy stuff, and we got into financial trouble. Later on in life, we used credit to invest into our businesses that grew our business. If the United States would take their debt and invest in the infrastructure we're supposed to, or invest into the new technologies and really propel this nation, and that would come from a vision of a national leader that says this is what we're going to accomplish in the next 50 years, and we put our investments in that like we did with the space program and the interstate system and things like that. Do you see that changing the trajectory of going from debt to just pay for stuff versus using that debt to invest into the future of the nation?
I think that could be a very helpful exercise. And I think it starts with having more information that's more easily digestible to the American people. There have been several bills in Congress to create taxpayer statements of account, for example, to show people what government does, where their money goes. And there are some on the left who have even said this is not a bad idea. They think it will demonstrate to the average taxpayer that they're getting a lot of value for their money. I think it will probably demonstrate the opposite, and people will be surprised to learn that most of what the federal government does is redistribute money. It's a giant transfer payment. That's
sure
the
is.
primary activity.
Well,
no, go ahead, Annie.
Well, we've had on the show many times Adam from the Open the Books, and he has a wonderful site that proves exactly where all the money goes and how it's shuffled around. But you had mentioned, Ted, about the Germany pre-World War II, with people walking down the street with wheelbarrows of currency that was basically worthless. For you, Tim, this is my question here, because in today's society, very few people actually carry physical cash. These are numbers that are up in the cloud. You claim that you've got X amount of dollars in your bank account, but should our economy collapse, what happens to people that don't have the physical currency like when they did in South Africa go and say, well, you turn it in and we'll give you something back. All we have are numbers in the air. Did we lose Tim?
Yeah.
Pete?
I'm sorry, Pete.
No. You're absolute.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm looking at my description. I'm calling the wrong name. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, we could very well be in a situation where, well, look at the federal government's own accounting processes. And I'm going to pick on the Department of Defense here, which is still unable to produce any kind of auditable financial statement. And okay, yes, they do a very important thing, and bean counting may not be as high on the priority list as defending the American people. But if you don't do the bean counting, you actually endanger the American people and their security. If you don't know where the money is going, if you don't know that your supply chains or your service people are actually being run efficiently, they're not going to be able to do their jobs. And so that's another reason to look at the numbers more closely and recognize that behind them is not just a set of mathematical equations, it's value that is either being misused or completely misspent or is not being put to its highest use.
Now, with the increased debt and with the inflation heading into the recession, a lot of people have their retirements or have their own accounts in the stock market. A good example is, municipal pensions, government pensions. A lot of their money is invested in various markets. So how would this affect their return on the dollar in their retirement accounts?
Yeah, at the state level, this is especially a problem. Many state employee pension funds are managed based on pretty high returns from financial markets. It's one way that they're often able to short their contributions into the funds. They say, well, we're going to project a 10 or 12% return this year on the investments our pension fund has made, even if all the signs point to a return rate of 8% or 9%. And year after year, they make these rosy projections that aren't met, and suddenly you wind up with a place like Kentucky or Illinois, which can only pay about half of the obligations it's promised to its state employees.
And then
that's right.
Now you have people with houses and stuff that can't make the mortgage because their pension has been cut in half. You have people that no longer can afford either food or medicines because their pension has been cut in half. But now, once the pensions drop, cut, or disappear completely in some cases, you're now looking at cuts in Social Security to try to balance the federal government. Oh, wait a minute. Federal government doesn't balance its budget, does it?
No. And if I were a dyed-in-the-wool Keynesian liberal elected to the federal government, that one of the first things I would want to do is ensure that people who have the means, whether great means or relatively small means, to save money away for their retirement, that they do so, and that the stock markets or the bond markets or however people choose to invest are kept reasonably robust and at least aren't undermined by bad federal policy. It would be in my best interest as a liberal politician to say, yeah, I want people to have good retirement portfolios built up on their own, because that will take the pressure off Social Security when it can no longer pay its obligations under the current financing method. You want people to have something other than Social Security to rely on in retirement, even
Absolutely.
upper middle class folks.
Yeah.
Oh, brings me.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah, go ahead, Ted. Go ahead, Ted.
Pete, we pay our taxes in this country, and I think in all countries, to run the government for the benefit of we the people in this country. And the number one task that the government has is to provide for the common defense of our nation. That's the number one thing. Outside of that, there's very few roles that this federal government's supposed to, they're very limited on what they can spend and do. And over the course of our 230 plus years as a nation, we have seen this just being ignored or taken advantage of. What can we, the average citizen, do if government doesn't abide by their own laws that are on the book? And I'll give you an example. Or, the Department of Education was never something in the Constitution, so it should never have been created. But here it is there. And so I think it's just pennies on the dollar that really go to the educational system back to the states. And if you look at education in this country and you look at it, the world scores, the PISA scores in the world that rate countries on reading, math, and science, we are steadily going down every year, and we're dropping. So government's not effective at doing that. We've got laws on the book that say what our immigration laws are, but the government's not enforcing that. And since the Biden administration, and it happened under Trump too, we have an influx of illegals. There's less under President Trump, thank goodness. But in this administration, the number I come up with, and I read over and over again, is between 2 and 4 million people. So if the government is not enforcing on the laws on the book, what can we do? And it's not that I don't want to pay my taxes. I'm okay paying my taxes, but I don't want to give it to the government if they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And this is crazy, but to put the money in an escrow account, so when you start following the laws, we'll start letting the money out and send it out in tranches. Like, well, if you did this, you can get this amount of money. And that's kind of really what the Boston Tea Party was about. It was a pushback on taxes they felt were illegal. Do you ever see a movement like that starting?
Well, there have been movements, and this goes back actually to the whole fair tax concept,
right?
To make taxes more visible and accountable and on a pay-as-you-go basis so that governments are held much more accountable to the laws that they're supposed to obey and enforce. And you take a look at the current income tax system, withholding that where the government takes an amount out of your paycheck every week or 2 weeks, however you're paid, was actually the brainchild of a Macy's executive named Beardsley Rummel back in 1942 when the United States needed a more consistent revenue flow to fight the war. And he said to the Treasury at the time, well, why not put people on a pay-as-you-go schedule for their taxes? It works for us. People will make bigger purchases if they only have to pay for it bit by bit every week. If they actually had to put down all the money for that new easy chair, why they would probably never buy it in the first place. That's what our tax system has become. You take a look at your paycheck, and you often forget that in many cases, a third of it is already spoken for. You don't even see it when you deposit your money in the bank. You only see it on your pay stub. Hey, wait a minute, I'm making $1,500 a week. Why am I only taking home $1,100 or $1,200? And people don't notice that as much in an income tax system because it's all done through direct deposit in many cases. Right. And, and going back to the fair tax, there are many critics who say, well, if we were to try and finance the federal government with that loan system, the rate would have to be 30 or 35%. And I say, yeah, it would. And every time people went to the cash register, they would say, wow, I'm paying this much for government? I think that there would be a greater level of accountability, and people would say, no, that's just too much. We've got to be able to do better than this.
Well,
was it written in the law that the taxes are taken out of our paychecks, or is that just something, like you said, it was a movement by Macy's to start doing that? Has that been mandated in the law?
Yes, there are withholding statutes that were enacted in the 1940s and then codified even further in what's the modern Internal Revenue Code of 1954, if you want to call 1954 modern.
Not bad. I was born in 55. I kind of feel modern. Annie, I'll be quiet.
Like I said, you don't ask a lady her age. Anyway, having read the Fair Tax book, what I love about it is that if you go in to buy yourself a new TV and you look at this one TV that has all the bells and whistles on it, and it's like $2,500, and you're going to be paying X amount of dollars, say, for example, 20 or 30% tax, you're going to be hesitant to buy that one, and you go for one that's more affordable in your budget. It still has most of the bells and whistles, but hey, you can do away with that. But it also opens up a cottage industry of secondhand goods where you're not paying taxes on something that's being resold, where it could then help those on the lower economic scale, but yet stir the economy by increasing different types of businesses dealing with secondhand merchandise. That's what I found great about that. But how would that actually help our economy? Would it stir it?
Well, there's a lot of debate that goes back and forth about that very point. I think that, yes, the production of new goods might actually suffer a bit under a system like that, but then again, we'd get more value out of used goods, and our money might actually be invested more productively in developing totally innovative products and services, or saving more money so that, again, there's less reliance on government programs for retirement or education in the future. And imagine that. You have these 529 savings plans for higher education, but what if people could just put away that money in even greater quantities with less reliance on state and federal funded higher education? Maybe, just maybe, those institutions would be more responsive to the students and their parents on a consumer level rather than a taxpayer level. And that's the important difference. A consumer is someone who chooses to buy a good or service and demands value out of it. A taxpayer is often someone who has no choice, pay up or else. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, considering there's going to be another 80,000 agents in the IRS, more than doubling their staffing. And, oh, gee, yeah, they're going to be armed with guns. I am so thrilled. Sarcasm aside.
Well, yeah, that's a very difficult question that's going to confront us in the years ahead. Where's all that money going to be spent? And how are we going to limit the impact on the American people and their rights?
Well, we have only just a few minutes left on the show. Geez, Ted, this is going so fast. And I apologize, Pete, for calling you the wrong name. I can be a little bit of a dizzy blonde. But Switzerland has a debt break. Do you see, and Ted, yeah, you probably could answer this too. Do you ever foresee us instituting something like that successfully?
Oh, I defer to Ted first.
You said it was a debt break?
Right.
Well, I'm not familiar with that. What is that?
Well, it's rather similar to some of the constitutional mechanisms that you see in a lot of states that limit the amount of borrowing that the government can engage in, might limit taxes and spending to a formula. We've seen this in places like Missouri. There's something called the Hancock Amendment that limits the growth of taxes in the state to the growth of personal income. And because they've got a balanced budget requirement, that also helps to keep spending in line. I think Florida has several mechanisms like that, and the state is a lot better off for them. Switzerland
we are.
has been, yeah, and Switzerland has been very good at controlling its debt, and they have a constitutional requirement that essentially says that there's a spending ceiling for Switzerland's federal government, and it requires the federal budget to balance over what's called the business cycle, so that it's not year over year, but over a period of years in which the economy is up or down. The debt load and the spending load has to be in equilibrium, so that Switzerland has a way lower debt to GDP ratio than the United States or most other countries has.
Well, that was kind of the idea behind PAYGO or sequestra, the sequester, movement. And they ran away from that just as quick as they could. And, we talked about pulling back spending, and, you looked at removing 1% to 2% out of a program. And, you had people apoplectic in the hallways, in the House floor, like you're starving people to death. And it's like, there's going to be a reality check. And, I look at the sequester movement or the balanced budget we always talked about, which you guys will get a kick out of this. I got up there in my first Congress, we passed a balanced budget, and they said this will balance in 7 years. Well, 3 years into it, Steve Scalise comes to me and Kevin McCarthy and Boehner says, we got a new budget. This will balance in 7 years. And I'm like, wait a minute. You told me that 3 years balance in 4 years, right? And they just look at you like you got three eyes. And it's like, they don't intend anything. I mean, they talk about it. And, then it moved to 10 year. This will balance in 10 years. And I'm like, you guys are so full of
monkey shine.
Yeah. And so are we really going to get these things under control? And I think it's going to have to be crisis, because Congress works best in crisis mode, because we know don't ever let a crisis go away without taking advantage of it. I say vote them out.
Yeah.
Vote the bums out.
Well, and that's the problem. That's the problem. You were just referencing, sir, about folks claiming a 1% to 2% cut, and people are going to be starving. And if you really want to see people starving in the streets, keep spending the way we are until we're broke. That's when people are going to starve.
Well,
what's interesting is with COLA, the COLA increase we just got. Annie, I got to say this real quick. The COLA increase, what is it? I think is it 8.7% or 7.1% it went up. Now, when things turn around and that COLA increase goes down and that cut comes to Social Security, you talk about some angry people. I remember it got cut 1% one year, and I've never seen so many angry old people. And that was just the way the economy was going. And so the reality is, it's up to the citizens. The citizens need to just act and hold these people accountable.
Well, we're down to our
and
last...
we need to pay it.
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, we're down to our last less than 3 minutes here. So we got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say, people are going to see a tax increase in their paychecks next year if they look closely enough, because there's an increase in Social Security benefits, but guess what? The taxable threshold on your salary for paying Social Security is going up by roughly an equal percentage. Look carefully out there, folks, and get angry about it, because the COLA benefit that Social Security folks have gotten is going to be paid for right out of your paycheck. You're going to be paying more in tax next year.
I'll be dang.
Well, Pete, it has been a pleasure. We have to definitely have you come back on again. I'm glad I came across your site and invited you on. People can find you at ntu.org for National Taxpayer Union, ntu.org. God bless you for the hard work you do, Pete.
Pete, it was great talking
to you.
And
same here. Look forward to chatting again.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, Pete Sepp, check him out at ntu.org. Ted, it has been a blast having you with us. We're down to within our last 2 minutes. I don't even know if I'll have time to do our closing song, but we are going to be taking off next week. It is Thanksgiving holiday. It is Thanksgiving holiday, isn't it, next week?
90 seconds.
No, that week after that, I believe.
Oh,
The
so-
24th.
Oh, the 24th. All right, so we're going to be taking the day after Thanksgiving. So we will be back here next week. And I assume that you're going to be with us next week also, correct?
I don't know if it's me or Curtis.
Well,
it's up to you. You're the boss.
Okay. Well, Pete, I
All
want
right.
to say thank you to Pete. Ted, it has been a great pleasure having you, and I hope that you will be with us next week. If I can get my mind straight, I'm telling you, I'm a dizzy blonde today.
60 seconds.
Not a problem. No, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity. And I sometimes get excited, and I jump in, and just feel free to tell me to shut up because I've been married for 47 years, and I'm okay with that.
Oh, I only do that to my boyfriend. I tell him to sit down and shut up, not to you. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a great weekend.
You too. Take care. Ted Yoho, former Congressman of Florida. Want to thank everyone that has been here listening in on Blog Talk Radio. And Sweet Sue has been sitting quietly inside our studio. So, Sue, I see you, and God bless you. Thank everyone that was up there on Facebook, YouTube, up on our webpage. Make sure you check us out next week. And that's all what I got to say for today. And I want to say good night. God bless, and have a safe weekend.
10
Happy
seconds.
Veterans Day to all. Good night.